The Rise of Iceland. Hey, fanfic family. So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction, so don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 151, Viking and number 039, stocking work before traveling. Since Olaf and Hader talked about education in the church once, the father and son rarely talked about this issue. Hader has been baptized by a civilized society since he was a child. He has been a devout believer in Christianity since he was a child. Of course, he is a little worse than the people of the southern countries, but he already believes in only one true God, Jehovah. As long as it is the past tense of the death of the gods at dusk, the only thing left to Hader and the Icelanders is the difference between ancestor worship and belief in the existence of elves. Olaf showed special features 10 years ago, making Hader think that his second son was an ancestor manifestation and a prophet directed by God. Therefore, Hader has always respected and loved Olaf, and his sword intent was also in his heart. Basically can be adopted and absorbed. Hader originally thought that under the guidance of the prophet and his own efforts, he could become a legendary hero, and his son Olaf would also become a prophet saint like Moses, and secondly, he would have to be Saint Paul. But after hearing Olaf's words, Hader couldn't sleep at night. After thinking about it, he thought that his second son was afraid that he wanted to be Jesus. Although he trusted and loved Olaf very much, he was involved in soul belief. Hader decided to be more cautious and talk about it slowly. The first step is to find a few learned and honest priests or Puritans from Plymouth, and build a church and mission school in the inner city of Herod to solve the white people's need for worship and the urgent need for children to go to school. As for saying that in the future, like Martin Luther, he will change the Christian denominations and even integrate into the primitive religious culture of Northern Europe. Hader felt that this is not a question he should think about. If Olaf is capable, he will default to his greatest support in the future. Since February 1630, the city of Herod has woken up from hibernation, and the city of more than 10,000 people has exploded with amazing execution power every day. The Vikings, slaves, and contract white slaves led by Adam Paddle had worked in accordance with Hana's instructions. White wolf soldiers and Viking soldiers formed 12 hunting teams and led some slaves and warriors to the eastern part of Wendland to hunt. In the 18th Tangli, 10 Adams personnel set sail with contracted white slaves and indigenous slaves every day, fishing, while some of the remaining 8 Adam people began to lead their own slaves and white slaves in land reclamation. This is the land planned to be reclaimed this year. It will be included in the Viking Leading public land and will be handed over to contracted white slave cultivation in the future management according to the previous agreement. From this year onwards, the Vikings will have the greatest rights. The private property of the Vikings will be protected and respected, but the Vikings must also be responsible for their duties, such as military service, taxation, and military service. From now on, one Viking family will only need to work one day free of charge. The rest of the time will be free to hunt, farm, and engage in their own affairs. At the same time, every Viking family must take on the responsibility of fighting for the Viking Thunder, that is, all men over the age of 16 and under 50 who are not disabled are members of the Viking Corps and participate in training once a week. This is an unquestionable duty. Although the Vikings in Wendland reduced their workload, there were 2,200 Vikings in the city of Herod, of which less than 2,000 adults. In addition, the White Wolf soldiers and contract whites were mainly engaged in work. Slaves, slave warriors, and ordinary slaves, so every day this year, hunting teams, fishing teams, etc. have a rich harvest to bring back to the city on weekdays. Vikings also go out fishing and hunting in groups during their free time, but the gains must be given to Vikings in proportion, which is much easier than when they were exploited by the governor in Iceland. Growth City. All the high-level officials in the country can see that since this spring, the Vikings have gradually become wealthy. With Hader's days getting better and better, the Vikings are getting more and more motivated, and the white slaves are also vying for performance, hoping to end the contract time as soon as possible and become a Viking. Olaf travels to and from the caramel workshop and the brewery workshops and porcelain workshops in the factory every day. While watching the production, he also learns a lot of new knowledge. After all, Olaf only knows the process at the beginning, and his subordinates operate every day. Many new problems have appeared in China and they have been solved through skilled craftsmanship and collective wisdom. Since the rights and interests of the Vikings are guaranteed, Olaf cannot squeeze his 2 Adden people for free like last year, so the Viking workers who follow Olaf to make wine and sugar can also get 10 copper plates every day. Olaf has implemented a model of signing labor contracts in his own factories and sugar workshops. Each Viking worker is paid according to the type of work. He works 6 days a week and can rest on Sundays. The slave apprentice belongs to the craftsman. Slaves can earn from 1 to 5 copper plates, and of course the income is given to the Viking masters of the slaves. Since the start of construction in February, Olaf's factory and sugar workshop have consumed more than 140 copper plates of Olaf every day, which is worth 1 shilling. However, Olaf now has 10,000 pounds of jerky, potatoes, sweet potatoes, etc. that belong to him, not to mention a few, and there are several thousand gold coins and silver coins, and he can completely afford a salary at a time. Originally, Olaf could ask his father Heir to pay the workers' wages, but in order to rob himself of more wealth through factories and products, Olaf discussed with Heir on the contract system, that is, he opened a factory at his own expense and produced the products. Product sales profits are divided into half, with Heir said it is half and half. In fact, Olaf can get more than half of the profit, because there is no one to supervise the workers' wages and material consumption, which is equivalent to Olaf saying that the cost is as much as the cost. However, when entering March, Olaf also calculated once with paper and pen. Artisans such as carpenters, stonemasons, and pen makers consume the least materials and are the cheapest, so the cost is low and the profit is low. Basically, it belongs to the production of loss for self-use. As a result, the apprenticeship of these 3 craftsmen is decreasing. At present, only carpenters have trained 2 apprentice slaves because they can make furniture. Craftsmen such as stonemason and pen maker are very leisurely. The cobblers have been doing good business because they are responsible for producing leather boots and leather clothing. They are basically busy every day. On average, they can produce 7 or 8 pieces of shoes, hats, and clothes a week. According to the sales situation last year, they are enough to supply the internal consumption of the Vikings and Herat city. The needs of the surrounding colonies can be regarded as a production line that can make a certain profit, but the main purpose of this business is to slowly penetrate the indigenous people through trade. www.uxiaspit.com. It can play a very necessary strategy in the future effect, such as detecting intelligence, such as provoking conflicts, such as hiring thugs, etc. The porcelain firing workshop in the Olaf factory is currently fully spent. Every month Olaf sends slaves to collect mineral soil. At the same time, he also has to worry about collecting bones, which are usually bones shaved from dried fish and dried meat. Olaf wants it. Bake the bone broth for your own slaves and then dry and grind the bone meal, so that the fat of the bone meal is gone, and it is suitable for adding bone china. Although the daily salary of a porcelain craftsman is 10 copper plates, Olaf believes that when bone china is sold in Europe this spring, it will bring him hundreds of times of profits. Sugar workshops and wine workshops currently only have no return on investment, but Olaf colleagues are confident that they know that these 2 products are hardly needed by the wealthy people in Europe. For European aristocrats who lack food and entertainment, the sweet oriental caramel and the clear taste, the water of life that surpasses whiskey, will surely be sought after. Olaf looked at the list of wages and salaries being paid every day, as well as the ever-increasing list of goods, and smiled with satisfaction. 1 shilling a day's wages and part of the cost can get 3 expensive high-end consumables on the European market: bone china, caramel, and spirits. The price-performance ratio can be said to be higher than robbery. https://Genius remembers this site address in 1 second. Mobile version reading URL. Chapter 152, Planning of Wineland Farm. With the improvement of the efficiency of sugar factories and wineries, the sweet potato dregs produced by sugar making every day, and the lees of the finished wine filtration, weigh hundreds of pounds. At the beginning, Olaf always brought the leftover from sugar making to the workers to feed their native slaves and domestic livestock and poultry. However, as the finished wine after fermentation begins to be filtered, the amount of distiller's grains increased every day, and the amount of the 2 superimposed is so large that even the Viking workers cannot consume it even if they take them home. After all, this thing is not delicious, and slaves can't eat more. Seeing the increasing amount of distiller's grains and sweet potato dregs in the warehouses and sugar mills, Olaf remembered his previous idea to start a large-scale farm. Agriculture is the fundamental industry for human survival and development. In a narrow sense, it refers to planting and breeding. At present, Wenland's planting industry has been greatly developed, essentially relying on manure and high-yield crops such as corn, pumpkins, sweet potatoes, and potatoes. Wait, but the aquaculture industry is still in its original state at present. Wenland only has the embryonic form of aquaculture in the city of Herat. Bakans is still the Bedex fishing, hunting, gathering and other lifestyles. There is no development of aquaculture, and the city of Hader has not developed because of its new construction and small population. Aquaculture count and calculate, except for the existence of Viking family breeding in Herat city, that is, Greenland is carrying out reindeer breeding in the past. The breeding industry could not develop efficiently because of the lack of feed and management. Now the feed is sufficient. Olaf feels that it is entirely possible to use Viking women and private slaves in Herat city to start a large-scale breeding farm, using Vikings to invest in labor. According to the situation, each family dispatched a population of 2 to 3 to manage, feed and collect fodder. The current era is different from Olaf's previous life. The labor force in the current era is over-squeezed. In addition to farm work and housework, women in ordinary families are also responsible for making clothes, sewing and mending, and raising children, so there is almost no limit when nowadays. Viking families in Wenland have at least 2 or 3 private slaves, so the most complicated and tiring work such as housework and even farm work has liberated the husband and housewife of the housekeeper. Men basically participate every week. 2 days of collective work, military training, and fishing and hunting for the rest of the time to accumulate wealth for their families. Women's lives are much easier. Olaf now wants to start a breeding farm, and the labor force happens to be able to use the free Viking women as the main ones, because the Vikings, who are mainly Icelanders and white slaves, were originally farmers and herders, and they have seen them when living in Europe. Most of them have understood the characteristics of livestock and poultry. The Vikings are far better than the Bedex and Akismas, who do not know how to breed. Olaf has more than 100 slaves. Like other Vikings, the slaves carry out activities such as gathering, fishing, hunting, and chopping wood every day under the leadership of the production team leader. Even strong women have to do these tasks. The owner accumulated wealth resources such as dried meat, dried fish, fur, firewood and so on. The Bedex and Akismas were most proficient in hunting, fishing, and gathering edible nuts and berries. Therefore, apart from letting the slaves collect wood, stone and dry works for the city of Herat, most of the time the Viking masters let the slaves obtain resources and wealth for themselves. In the beginning, Olaf wanted to set up a breeding farm, in order to use his own slaves for feeding and management, but he wanted concentrated animal breeding to increase the risk of disease outbreaks in livestock and poultry, and he needed to be proficient in many aspects such as breeding, management, and disease prevention. Breeding requires the participation of experienced Vikings. In order to make the farm complete, Olaf felt that he could only bring in Vikings to participate, and because the success or failure of the breeding industry depends on the responsibility and skills of the breeding management personnel, carelessness will cause death, freezing death, low mating pregnancy rate, dystocia, high abortion rate and so on. In order to reduce losses, increase reproduction rate, and reduce mortality, Olaf thinks that only Vikings involved in breeding and management can become shareholders in the farm, so that for every animal that survives, every additional cow, horse, pig and sheep will have them in it. They will definitely be as concerned about serving their own children. Olaf thought about the basic plan for setting up a farm. He chuckled, and said, "Am I taking the path of common prosperity?" After a grumble, Olaf went to Heine, and found the military fort from the chamber. Finally, after inquiring clearly, he went home and rode to an agricultural fort in the west of the city that manages 500 acres of arable land to find Heine at this time. Heine was wearing a black bear leather jacket, and a white shirt collar was exposed in the gap between the front of the front. He was inspecting the spring plowing around this agricultural fort. Today is Wednesday, and from Monday this week, spring plowing in the city of Groot has begun in an all-round way. Vikings led private slaves to plow their own land, while white slaves led indigenous slaves to plow the land of the Hader family and collective land. In order to ensure the high yield this year, it is necessary to carry out deep plowing and deep plowing before planting, so that the nutrients oil in the deep layer of the soil can be turned up, so that the soil can become soft, which is conducive to the germination and rooting of seeds, which can make sweet potatoes, and other crops more productive. This knowledge is learned from the draft of the agricultural book. This year's spring plowing, Vikings are planning to plant 80% of their land on sweet potatoes, and the remaining 20% for corn, pumpkin, beans, and vegetables. The four traditional crops of wheat, rye, barley, and oats are already rare. Regarding the collective land and the cultivated land of the Hader family, according to Hader's plan, half of the land is to be used to grow potatoes and sweet potatoes, and the remaining half to grow the three sisters, wheat and vegetables. Poor people may only want to pursue high-yield www.uxiaspit.com to ensure that they will not be hungry. As the general of Viking Ray and the lord of Vinland, Hader must ensure that the family can eat brown bread, flour and other foods. This is not only Guess's richness and eating habits are more representative of his decency. Under the influence of Hader, the leadership above the paddlehead in Groot will also set aside a small part of their land to grow rye, oats, etc., in order to allow their own bread and flour to be eaten, which seems to be invisible. Foods such as brown bread and flour has become a certain kind of food that represents the human identity of Vikings, just like the ancient nobles used fine grains and commoners ate coarse grains, expressing value by the output of food, and expressing status by eating precious food. At present, most of the land that can be developed around Groot City has been developed, with an area of nearly 6,000 acres, and about 1,000 acres can be developed in 2 months. Then the southeast peninsula that Groot City can radiate in the future. Cultivated land in the south is almost developed in the future. If we want to increase arable land, we can only start from the city of Hader in the northern part of the peninsula. In the past few years, Jod and Hoskard are also preparing to reclaim 1 or 2,000 acres of wasteland in the southwest of Hader, temporarily planting corn and black beans, and sweet potatoes and other crops. Therefore, since February, Hader City has been busy. Every day, dozens of white slave militiamen and 3,000 indigenous slaves are led outside the city to cut trees and shrubs, burn grass to open up wasteland, and finally turn over the ground. https://Genius remembers this site address in 1 second. Mobile version reading URL. Chapter 153, Resources and Breeding Farm Site Selection. In the winter of 1629, Hader and Heine also planned a long-term development plan for Vinland. When the western Bakken city gradually stabilized, they could mobilize the population to open up several settlements in the south of Vinland, build a city-state, and reclaim wasteland. If according to the final plan of Hader and others, Vinland will have 50,000 to 60,000 acres of arable land in 5 years and 10 years, and another 1 to 2 million acres will be developed in a few decades. In fact, according to the land area and topography, the cultivated land on Vinland Island accounts for about 1/10 of the total area, but the woodland that must be preserved in the cold climate zone in the northern region are discarded. Only the entire land south of the eastern part of Changling Mountain can be used and developed for agricultural planting, which is less than 3% of the total area. Iceland, after hundreds of families and tens of thousands of people of hundreds of years of development efforts, now only developed more than 200,000 acres of land, and basically the land that can be developed in Iceland is almost completed. The ancestor Harald controlled more than 10,000 acres of arable land and 10,000 acres of woodland hundreds of years ago. He became one of the richest and powerful family patriarchs in Iceland. He has the seat of the main members of the Icelandic parliament. Before the decline, he had been in control of 1/20th of Iceland's arable land and forest resources, so he was naturally a first-class boss. As the big boss, the Harald family only has more than 10,000 arable land, which is very shabby compared to the 30,000 or 40,000 acres of arable land for a large landowner in Ireland. The eldest brother of Hagrid, Raleigh Almore, the patriarch of the Almore family, a large landowner in Northern Ireland, owns 100,000 acres of arable land and 200,000 acres of woodland. Even so, he is not the person with the most land in Ireland. In many cases, the amount of land area cannot determine national strength, but the amount of arable land is the fundamental factor. The proportion of arable land in France and Germany has reached more than 30%. Therefore, it has always been the most populous area in Europe, so it has long held the European continent. The status of a powerful country. Even the British island country has a proportion of cultivated land that accounts for more than 15% of the land area, so it can have enough population to support colonization and conquests, and ultimately occupy the proportion of cultivated land and the population of the South Asian subcontinent, which accounts for 1/5 of the world's population. In one fell swoop, the sun never sets to become the British Empire, marching into the top powers to disregard the heroes. Therefore, in terms of population, arable land resources and many other aspects, Iceland is a veritable barren and backward region. It stands to reason that there is no capital to compete with any country. The environment has led to Icelanders' personalities and living habits that are closest to their ancestors, or they are accustomed to agriculture. An entrepreneurial model combined with HNA commerce and robbery. It is also because there is too little arable land, so Iceland's agriculture is actually supplemented by planting, mainly grazing, and because of limited resources. Population growth has been extremely slow for hundreds of years. Vinland's planting land resources should be more than 3 times that of Iceland when fully developed, and woodland resources are more than 6 times that of Iceland. At present, there are nearly 10,000 bioducks scattered throughout the northwest to survive, and they will be naturalized sooner or later. Those who have these resource bases, such as heir, will always think that it will not be difficult to surpass Iceland as long as Vinland is well developed in time. In fact, apart from the population, Vinland's resources are indeed much better than those of Iceland. Olaf dismounted from the front of the fort, and Heine, who had already started to beard on his lips, beckoned. When Olaf went in and sat down, the 2 contract white slaves beside Heine had already mixed the heat from the wooden cabinet on the side with water. The flask was taken out, 2 bowls were poured, and they were handed to Heine and Olaf. This wooden cabinet is a storage tool made by carpenters that can be carried around. It has heat preservation effect. It can carry books, drinks, dry food, etc. It can be regarded as a treasure box that is very convenient for travel, except for the car. It can only be carried by people, except for the maintenance of private slaves. Nobles in Beijing, most people can't afford it, and it's useless. Heine, as the traditional noble son of Scotland, has not abandoned his aristocratic demeanor. He took a sip of hot drink and asked, Olaf, what's the matter with you coming here? You are now a civil officer appointed by my father, General Lê Dang. How can I not discuss with Lord Williams if I want to do something? Olaf joked with a smile. Since Olaf wants to start a farm as a private business activity, he is not going to find his father, but he asks Heine, who knows more about the details, to help with the plan. Heine knew that Olaf must have a business deal with him, so he chuckled and asked, let's talk about it. What's the matter? Olaf said that he wanted to start a breeding farm. Heine thought for a while and asked, where can I find the feed? Now the brewery has 200 pounds of distiller's grains a day, and the sugar factory has 300 pounds of potato gluten a day. If it is not enough, people can be sent to mow the grass. The tender branches and leaves of the tree can be used as feed. Where can the keepers look for? Who will manage? Nowadays, there are no idlers in Groot, and the native slaves do not know how to feed and manage livestock. We Vikings have private slaves in their homes, and our wives are basically Icelanders, Irish, and Scots. They can be kept and managed. Where can the livestock and poultry of the breeding plant be purchased? My uncle's house, and Uncle Yacht's house have cows, horses and sheep, but there are fewer pigs, but they will increase gradually, and there are a lot of chickens, ducks and geese in each house, so spend money to buy some. Just fine. Heine answered a series of questions without hesitation. Heine nodded and said, you are right, I think this can be done. What do you want me to do for you? Olaf pointed to the direction of Groot City and said, I want to build a farm on the hillside southwest of the outer city. Can you help me see it? If it works, I have to use some wood and stone. Don't worry, I can pay for it. Heir city covers an area of 500 to 600 acres, which is divided into an inner city and an outer city. The inner city is the place where Heir fort, the military fort, the chamber and the Vikings and their domestic slaves live. www.uxiaspit.com covers an area of less than 100 acres, and also has basic walls and moats, city gates and other facilities, relying on some white wolf soldiers and slaves living in the outer city, and the Olaf factory. Generally speaking, more than 90% of the population lives in the inner city, and the outer city is mainly used for realm and protection. So white wolf soldiers and a small number of armed slaves live. Olaf said that the hillside in the southwest of the outer city is a gentle hillside. The area is not small. The highest height is only 4 or 5 people high, and there are trees and shrubs on both sides. A few thousand steps west of the hillside is a river facing south. The environment is pretty good. There is no need to worry about rain and snow accumulation in the construction of a breeding plant. Moreover, it is an upwind, so the smell of manure can also blow to the southeast, so that it will not stay in the pen to form biogas and poisonous gas. Heine smiled softly and understood Olaf's thoughts, so he said, some wood and stones are worthless. I can give you the shot. I believe that General Hadarsson will not care if he knows it. But I can't help build a breeding plant. We are now in the time of spring plowing and it will not be over in April, so I am sorry, Olaf didn't plan to let Heine send someone to build a breeding plant for him at the beginning. What he wanted was the materials, and he also hoped Heine would help the 500 Vikings in the city to talk about it and see how many people there could be. If you are willing to participate in a share, you can invest in shares with people who know how to breed, or you can use your family's livestock and poultry to invest in shares. https://Genius remembers this site address in 1 second. Mobile version reading URL. Chapter 154, Viking and number 039, SGDP per capita is number 1 in the world. Buy shares? Is that the meaning of the development of the East India Colonial Company? However, the East India Company received money to buy shares. How to estimate the value of the breeding plant's employment and livestock shares? Heine's heart moved after listening to Olaf's thoughts, but he was very puzzled, and then frowned and asked, I can help you publicize it. The question is how to divide your share agreement? How does the manpower share the share? How does the livestock and poultry share the share? Olaf had already had a draft, and he smiled. I am going to distribute 1,000 shares. A Viking can get 10 shares. Then I have to work 5 days a week and raise them every day, or manage them every day, or make ingredients every day, etc. Anyway, it is labor to invest in shares, take care of meals every day, and pay dividends based on benefits at the end of the year. The value of a cow and a horse is between 5 shares and 10 shares. The sheep is 1 share, and the chickens, ducks and geese are worth the same value as the sheep. Until 1,000 shares are issued, all the shares will fall into the hands of the Vikings. At the end of the year, dividends will be distributed according to the benefits. If 10 cattle are added at the end of the year, then the operating costs of 2 or 3 of these 10 cattle will be removed, and the remaining 7 will be to all shareholders. They are allocated according to their holdings. For example, if the net weight of 7 cows is more than 8,000 pounds, that 1 share can be divided into 7 or 8 pounds of beef. 10 shares are 70 or 80 pounds, including horses, sheep, chickens and ducks. Geese and other animals are all distributed in proportion. Heine heard the light in front of his eyes and asked, how should the animals be distributed if they are not slaughtered? Dividends are discounted according to value. For example, a cow is worth about 4 pounds of silver. A pair of 7 cows is estimated based on weight and age. If the total value is 30 pounds of silver, 1 share can be divided into more than 20 for copper plates. If 1 Viking man or 2 cows buy shares, it will be divided into 300 copper plates, which are worth more than half a silver mark. After listening to the pie drawn by Olaf, Heine, who was exposed to illegal financing for the first time, did not understand the curves inside. He could not immediately notice the risk that everyone's investment after the failure was lost. On the contrary, he admired with great interest. Said, sounds really good. Of course, many times the smarter people will be a little confused when they encounter people close to them. Heine is unwilling to think deeply about the risks and hidden dangers of Olaf opening a breeding plant. After all, there are risks in doing anything, as long as the basic conditions are met. I can do it. After talking with Heine, Olaf rode his horse slowly to the factory. On the way, he saw many Hader's private slaves scattered around looking for maple trees to collect maple sap. Since last year, Hader has ordered and stipulated that all maple trees on Vinland Island belong to the assets of Viking Thunder. No one is allowed to cut down and damage or collect sap. However, after the maple syrup is boiled every spring, a certain amount will be allocated to the Vikings. No one raised any objection to Hader's decision, because royal jelly was the invention of Master Olaf. And because Vinland adopted the Viking Thunder system, Hader, as general leading, had military, financial, and personnel rights. It can be said that the status is very high and the power is very large. It is completely different from the feudal lords in Europe. The Vikings dare not obey the orders of the generals. Although there is a gap compared with the banner masters of the Far East, the difference is not very big. In March, the climate and the time are ripe. It is the critical time for the 20 to 30 days of collecting sap to make sugar. Since March, the hundreds of private slaves in Hader's hands began to scatter around woodland with contracted white slaves to look for maple trees to collect sap, and then brought them back to Haderborg to agree to make maple syrup. Although Olaf's sugar-making workshop can produce 40 to 50 pounds of sugar per day, because it uses sweet potatoes in the warehouse, Hader only occupies 20% of this share, and Viking raiding occupies 50% of the total, and the remainder together with the cost belongs to Olaf, so Hader doesn't get much. For the big cake of maple syrup, which is still far larger than the oriental sugar candy, Hater is still the most concerned, although it can only be produced once a year. According to last year's output value, Vinland Island can produce more than 2,100 cans, which is an annual output value of more than £40,000, compared with the output value of the cane sugar plantations in Spain and Portugal in Central and South America. Already on par, it is important to know that the cane sugar produced by the cane sugar plantations of the United Kingdom of Spain and Portugal in Central and South America is dumped in Europe, accounting for more than 30% of Portugal's fiscal revenue, and the export volume of cane sugar from the United Kingdom of Portugal and Spain also accounts for the European cane sugar market 70% of the share. Although the guise of royal jelly enhances the value of maple syrup of the same output value contains a lot of water, but in any era, there are inevitably high-priced commodities, such as mung beans, maca, and black wolfberry. Royal jelly's magnificent name and novel flavor. Golden amber color is indeed more than black or even ginger yellow general sugar, so the royal jelly packaged by Olaf with mysterious color and health functions is no longer just a dessert, it's also a good one. This is a luxury product, so premium sales are not a problem after Olaf's development and help, and after he ruled the entire Vinland. The Viking thunder burst out with strong execution and search capabilities. This peaceful island, which has accumulated resources for tens of thousands of years, was quickly searched for resources and then transformed. For wealth last year, the combined income of the fur, syrup, dried meat, dried fish, wine, wood, and other commodities collected and produced on the whole island of Vinland and Greenland has reached a staggering amount of more than 400,000 mark silver, not counting the cost of the very small share. Just looking at this number, Vinland's annual income has reached Iceland's annual tax revenue and half of Irish agricultural tax revenue. Iceland has a population of 50,000 to 60,000 and more than 200 merchant ships and fishing boats, hundreds of thousands of sheep, tens of thousands of cattle, horses and other livestock. Ireland also has a population of 2 to 3 million and vast arable land. www.wooksyaspit.com. Relying on the luxury goods accumulated by nature, land has pushed the per capita GDP of 2,600 Vikings to the world's top level, a per capita annual income of 600 taels of silver. We must know that there is no industrial revolution in the current world. Except for the Netherlands, which is a commercial country, all countries in the world are still based on agriculture. Agricultural taxes generally account for more than 40% of the national fiscal revenue, and even more than 7%. 80 Vinland agriculture has just met self-sufficiency by relying on high-yield crops. It has already gained wealth comparable to the agricultural taxation of small countries by relying solely on commodity trade income. This cannot but be said to be a terrible rise in speed. Some New French and New Englanders who have estimated the income scale of Vinland in their hearts are also secretly surprised, especially Champlain and McGonagall think that Hater is great, and they dare not even think about the hostile thoughts in their hearts. Since Hater took over the production of royal jelly with all his strength, Olaf has stopped intervening in this product. After all, he can also develop projects such as bone china, caramel, water of life, and even breeding plants. There is no need to compete with his father for the maple syrup business. There is no way to fight. It can be said that at present Vinland's richest fur and maple syrup business is basically completely controlled by Hater, but starting this year, the Vikings can still get a share for distribution. White slaves and indigenous slaves are completely in vain. https:// Genius remembers this site address in 1 second. Mobile version reading URL. Chapter 155, Shacklimnir Farm. After Olaf and Hannah Williams exchanged opinions on the establishment of a large-scale breeding plant, the city of Groot seemed to be quiet, but Hannah promoted Olaf's breeding plant every day, and it took less than 3.5 days. All the Vikings already knew that Master Olaf would follow the example of the East India Colonial Company in England and the Netherlands, recruiting Viking manpower and animal power into shares, and starting a breeding company. Since there are only 1,000 shares, Hannah did not dare to call the shots, and only allowed Vikings who were willing to participate in shares to sign up temporarily, and Olaf had to make a decision after the final review was passed within a few days. Hater also learned that what Olaf said a year ago to start a breeding plant was actually going to be done, and many Vikings were willing to buy shares, so he waved his hand at the end of the day. I will give you 30 sheep in the family, 2 cows and horses. And crossbred horses can also give you a female. How many shares do you count for me? Olaf laughed and said, you are a general of Viking Ragi, and you are willing to buy shares. How can you count 10 shares for you? Hater chuckled and waved his hand. Okay, you can pull it over when your factory is built. Olaf hurriedly got up to salute his more and more dignified father, and then went back to the house with joy and wrote a note saying Hader's 10 shares Olaf, proving that Hader has 10 shares in the future breeding plant. What is the name of your breeding plant? Hader asked suddenly when he handed the share list to his wife next to him. Olaf hadn't had time to think about this question. He was taken aback after hearing the words, and after thinking about it, he asked, I haven't thought about it yet. Would you like to get one for me? Hader smiled slightly and said with blinking eyes, how about the name Shaklimnir Breeding Company? Shaklimnir. Olaf chewed on the name his father said, and he felt very familiar. When he saw that Hader's face was a little mysterious and weird, he suddenly remembered that Shaklimnir was a beast in the original Nordic polytheistic legend. The wild boar that God used to eat in different ways, but this wild boar was killed and eaten every day, and it could always reappear intact the next day. It was a consumable that could never be consumed in Norse mythology. Shaklimnir and the other two goats are used as food ingredients. Although they are mythical beasts, their style is indeed low, and their status in mythology and appearance rate are extremely low. The meaning of Hader's name is obvious, that is, he hopes that the livestock and poultry in Olaf's breeding factory will be more and more like Shaklimnir. They can't be eaten or used up. The name sounds no problem at first, but it appears in Hader, a Christian's mouth. Its essence is ungodly towards Christianity, because the future of the breeding business is pinned on the Nordic myths and legends that have become the past tense and heresy. Middle is an expression of ungodliness. Although Icelanders have always had reservations about the piety of the Lord Jesus, they openly showed a lot of things from a livelihood cause, such as Hader's softening of the Reformation that Olaf said before. Olaf is very smart, or very keen, and immediately understood his father's meaning. Seeing Olaf looked at him, Hader knew that his second son understood what he meant. So he smiled and said, yes, I have already thought about it. As a prophet given to our family by God, you must have something beyond ordinary people. Locally, was killed by Judaism back then, and Christianity was eventually resurrected. If you can tell about the Reformation, I think it must be the Lord's meaning, so I decided to support your proposal for the time being, but you have to think about it. Do it again. After speaking, Hader moved his lips, still unable to say the last sentence in his heart. I don't want you to be Jesus. Olaf learned that as the father of General Lidang, he offered to give the breeding company a name of the beast in Nordic mythology. That was a signal, a kind of Viking Lidang's relaxed attitude towards the traditional Nordic polytheistic religion. I think that even Nordic polytheism has the possibility of restoration. The name of Shaklimnir Breeding Company was passed on the next day. Olaf knew well to consciously let people publicize, and instructed friends around him and Icelanders who knew Norse mythology to publicize white slaves and indigenous slaves. The story of the myth. Olaf does not want to restore Nordic polytheism. First of all, this religion has not been beaten, and there is no systematic doctrine, classics, etc., and there is no superior doctrine that brainwashes people or even catches people's hearts. It can be said that it was born in the harsh and barren northern Europe. Among the ancestors of the Germanic people in the region, they changed to other environmental ethnic groups. According to the legend, the religion that put the gods and other great gods to death could not survive the beginning. If religion wants to be inherited and convinced, it must blow the gods invincible. If the three brothers born in Jerusalem say that the Lord made the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh day, Hinduism says that any can destroy the world, and Taoism is the Sanking who has the level of creation of the great heaven. Why don't people say that after creating the world, take a day off? Buddhism even says that everything is dreamy. Obediently, a reincarnation path will make life and death. The regrets of this life can be made up in the next life, and it is even more level than the three brothers' doomsday liquidation threats. So even if a flower from Jerusalem grows into three brothers, the civilization developed by the three brothers eventually swept the world. But Buddhism and Taoism still have their own living space. How does Norse mythology compare with Christianity? When the other gods said that there should be light, the world would have light, and the other gods said that the world would be destroyed, and the world would be restarted after a great flood. But what about your Norse mythology? The first creature in the world was a cow, and then a giant was born. The cow licked ice and salt and licked out an ancestor of the gods. As a result, the giant was afraid that the gods would fight for his milk and hack them to death. The corpse of the gods he gave birth to his heirs, and the body of the giant also gave birth to sons and daughters. As a result, heirs of the gods and the children of the giants combined to give birth to new gods. Everyone worked together to kill the creation giant and used his corpse to create everything in the world. Since the birth of the gods of Norse mythology are not omnipotent and omniscient, and they can be killed. And they have many flaws. For example, the Odin has to sacrifice an eye to drink the spring water for increasing wisdom, instead of being born with it. With wisdom, this shows that the level of the Nordic gods is incomparable with other religious gods. What is more exaggerated is that other religions use the doomsday to scare the believers and their people. The doomsday has appeared in Norse mythology, and the gods are almost destroyed. Actively look at the Nordic mythology showing the elements of reality. Belief in death and rebirth are the same. So in the ancient and middle ancient times, they were all people who fear death. However, when Christianity was passed on, the low-end style of polytheism was banned. Berserker Vikings who feared death became brave and combative Nordic, and the risk factor dropped by 3 stars regardless of the reason. The Icelandic people have believed in Catholicism and Christianity for more than 600 years. The primitive polytheism has become a myth and occasionally talked about as a story, but the Icelandic people have never dared to tell the truth. www.uxiasp.com Because after all, Christianity is an exclusive religion. With God, any so-called gods are not true gods, but idols, heretics, and demons. As a Christian, he openly talked about heretical gods. In the Middle Ages, he was going to be warmed up on a fire due to religious blockade and suppression, and the rejection of Nordic polytheism by Christian religious beliefs. Icelanders basically no one believes in primitive religions. At most they believe in the existence of ancestral souls, and believe that phrase elves exist in the trees and boulders, and after hundreds of years the integration of these innocuous things is also organically integrated with Christian culture. Now Heir has named Olaf's breeding company a legendary beast name in Nordic legends, using the power of Nordic myths and legends to pray for a good future for the breeding company. Strictly speaking, it is considered to be a heresy. It's just that for Vinland, who is far away from the European religious atmosphere and has no church priests, no one has noticed this at all. On the contrary, many Icelanders and even Irish and Scottish white slaves are discussing and spreading Norse mythology. They regard Norse mythology as there are legends, but people don't know. When the Norse mythology is deeply rooted in the hearts of the people, Olaf will carry out the religious reform and use Christianity to absorb the Norse mythology to create a new Protestant that is conducive to the rule of the Heir family. Then there will be little resistance. Sometimes Olaf feels that in the land of America, if you don't reform Christianity, you're sorry for an almighty God. https://genius remembers this site address in 1 second, mobile version reading URL. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 156, Sign a Contract. When Norse mythology spread rapidly in the city of Grode, Heine also found Olaf with a list full of names. While handing over the list, Heine said, "Our people in Lidang heard that it was your master Olaf who wanted to start the Shacklemnir breeding company. They are all vying to buy shares. Now more than 500 households have signed up. I'll join in the fun too. How do you think about it?" Olaf looked at the list and simply counted. The leaders from Heine to the rudder head, the oar head, and the production captain all have 5 to 2 or 3 shares. The rest of the Vikings basically have 1 share. Among them, livestock hold the most shares, accounting for 60 to 70%, and some rely on the manpower of their wives, and there are also more than 20 people. As for the 5 shares that Heine entered, I'm afraid it is to set an example so that other Vikings can feel relieved. Good. Olaf clapped his hands and laughed. Master Williams is the Prime Minister's material. Heine snorted, as if he didn't catch a cold with Olaf's horses, but he said in a relaxed tone, "I have calculated it briefly. Everyone accounted for more than 700 shares. I heard that the general bought 100 shares? You too. 100 shares have to be reserved, and that's about it." Olaf's heart moved after hearing Heine's words, and guessed that Heine deliberately controlled the Vikings and could not replace too many shares. He was afraid of taking Heir in his own shares, which would be troublesome. Guessed that Heine had been thinking about himself. Olaf warmed his heart and smiled. "Brother-in-law, you must have counted how everyone is going to exchange shares? Tell me." Heine also said with a clear cough, "There are 14 cows, 11 horses, 1 healthy horse, 115 sheep, 23 pigs, more than 300 chickens, ducks and geese, and Viking women. There are 28 workers. The total shares are 746 shares." Olaf knew that this data was definitely the real data that Heine had calculated at home, and hurriedly took out the charcoal notes from his arms and put them on the list. Your sister heard that you are going to start a breeding company, and she also wants to come to work. One of the 28 female workers is her, Heine said with a slight twist. Olaf instantly understood that his brother-in-law was a nobleman, and felt that his wife was too dirty and humble to breed, but Icelandic women would not follow the arrangements of their men. Heine looked like his cousin had to come. Don't worry, I will let my cousin be the assistant and factory manager of the breeding company, and be responsible for managing other female workers. How about giving her an extra 20 shares? Olaf knew what his cousin meant, and thought he had to take care of himself. Cousin then said thank you, Olaf. Heine thanked him relievedly, and then said, you don't have to suffer too much in the case of shares, our own relatives. You and I are good friends again. How can I treat my sister badly? Olaf grabbed Heine, struck him lightly on his shoulder, and said with winking eyebrows. Heine looked at the mature and sly face of this young man who was as tall as him, and couldn't help but feel happy and warm. He couldn't help but exclaimed, if your sister knows that you take care of her like this, it will take a few more days to be proud. You? The two walked side by side to the chamber, and Olaf said sideways, I will write a contract based on this list next time, stating how everyone will invest in shares and the shares they occupy, and then you will summon them to the chamber to sign and confirm in the afternoon. Yes. I'll make arrangements later. Also, the western of the outer city is still deserted. We have to start building the factory right away. I want to send a slave to participate in the manpower of this factory. I will find a few white slaves who are proficient in architecture to guide me. With more than 500 people working every day, I think it will be completed in less than a month, Olaf said vowedly, while looking at Heine. Heine thought for a while, and said, this is not difficult. I will notify you. I can send the wood and stone to Zippo tomorrow. Don't worry. Olaf chuckled and said goodbye to Heine and went to the chamber to find a pen and paper copy of the contract. When Viking Ray was first established, there were 1,800 Vikings, and then Heir was appointed as the general of Ray. Hagrid was the district governor of Pester, and actually managed the owners, Hudik, Yacht, and Kadir. Hoskard fought for the four Manju rudder heads, is the real figure in control of the real power, and down there are 19 Adin or heads. One of the Inuit Adin was taken by Piku. Greenland, there are only 18 Adings on the island after a year of development. The problem of the imbalance between men and women among Vikings was solved last year. 600 white female slaves filled the emptiness and loneliness of the Vikings and symbiotic Vikings who were born in white slaves. The natural gift of the population. Now there are more than 2,500 Vikings in the city of Herald. Even if the 500 Vikings in Plymouth, the 30 Vikings in the Basque and the city of Heir have been removed. 10 or 20 people, and there are still 2,000 Vikings living in the city of Herat. This is the real residence of Vinland and the basic played in Heir's hands. Although the population has increased, but because it is not too much, it has not even completely exceeded the pass of 2,500 people, so Viking Lidang did not make adjustments, even though the population of 18 Adin and 4 Manjulfin has expanded a lot. However, it is foreseeable that when Viking Thunder is adjusted next time, the number of Vikings will increase by hundreds of households because there is no separation of families. The 2,000 Duau Ejingren use their households to buy shares in the breeding company, but there are only more than 500 households when they are fully paid. For example, Kadir is one household, Heine is one household, Hoskett is one household, and Karl, because Mew and Kar who were not married, they belong to Hoskett. But even if there are only more than 500 households, Olaf is not prepared to write a 500-point contract for everyone to sign. He's going to directly sign a total of 2 contracts with 18 Adin or heads, but each Viking can be in their own oars. Sign the name below the first name, so that Heine will save a copy, and you can save a copy yourself. Anyway, the business contracts model has not been a long time in Europe. The Vikings in Wendland don't understand the so-called signing of contracts. It's just a cutscene after a lot of hard work. It took Olaf over an hour to draw up 2 contracts. During the period, 3 or 4 pieces of paper were scrapped and his tired wrists became sore. The bell rang at 12 noon in the chamber. Olaf closed his contract and went home for lunch, and then rested for an hour before returning to the chamber. By the time Olaf approached the chamber in the afternoon, many Viking women were already standing in front of the chamber, under the leadership of the wife of the production captain and the lady of the Orhead. www.uxiaspit.com. Icelandic culture and the Middle East Halal cultural circle and the Eastern celestial cultural circle are completely different. There are also many differences from European countries. Although most of them are details, one thing that is obviously different from other regions is that Icelandic women have a high family status normally. Icelanders cannot marry a daughter and cannot be the parent. They must seek their daughter's opinion and consent. After marriage, women and men enjoy close to equal status. For example, women can file for divorce and can control and enjoy the wealth of the family, can make many decisions involving wealth and family reputation, so Icelandic men respect their wives. If you compare the rights of women, even in Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, which are also Nordic countries, the status and rights of women are not as significant as the independence of Icelandic women in the 17th century, although European women were still unable to engage in military, political and other fields, and even many women did not want to work. Although their status was not high, they were partially respected, especially when they were basically able to go out and show their faces. Make independent decisions on small things on behalf of your husband. Compared with European women, Icelandic women can not only go out, they can also engage in production and life independently, can remarry at will after divorce, and can even conceive and have children when they are not married, and they will not be condemned outside the family. https://Genius remembers this site address in 1 second. Mobile version reading URL. Chapter 157, Cousin Vanhill. Because Iceland has a high status of women, sometimes women can also make decisions on behalf of the family. Olaf was not surprised to see all women waiting in front of the chamber door. He greeted everyone, then took them into the hall, and then asked them to sit down. Olaf, you finally remembered that you took our fellow villagers from heir to make a fortune? Eric kept talking about following you forever? I knew you as far back as Iceland. Not immortal. Look, it's not surprising, because the people are still not there. Everyone chatted for a while, and a freckled woman in her 30s laughed and joked with Olaf. Olaf recognized this woman as Lund's little wife. His eldest wife died of illness 10 years ago. This woman was newly married 5 years ago. When she was a stepmother in Iceland, she was very indifferent to Eric. However, since coming to Wenland, Lund has become the head of Adenors. Eric has also achieved the position of production team leader, and there are more than a dozen private slaves in the family, and the woman who thinks that she is a noble lady takes the heir. At the same time, the attitude towards Eric was much better. This time I spoke to Olaf even more politely. At the same time, I looked at the women around me triumphantly after speaking, and seemed to be showing off. Look, I directly call Master Olaf's name, which shows that my relationship with him and get close. Several of the women present here are the wives of Valatu, Naranhu, and others. They are all honest crop women, and they don't mean to speak to Olaf to show their authority. Most of the women didn't say a word, but there were also a few people who secretly envied this woman for marrying a good husband and having a good son. Olaf didn't care about the intrigue of the women. After a few words, he saw women coming in one after another outside the door. After a while, the hall was full of people. Olaf counted as many as 200, basically the women from the production team leader and the team leader's house are here, and half of the ordinary Viking women are also here. The women became lively as soon as there were more women, and the voice in the chamber gradually increased. Olaf was even a little upset by the quarrel, and then continued to look out, hoping that the last two or head ladies could arrive as soon as possible. Then signed the contract and finish. After a moment, a tall, fair-skinned woman walked in. She was wearing a woolen coat and had long golden and flowing hair, basically the same color as Olaf's. Her cousin Vanhill. Olaf stepped forward and hugged her cousin cordially. My Olaf has grown taller again. Maybe next year you will be taller than me. Cousin Vanhill is the only daughter of Uncle Kadir. She has inherited this uncle's height, hair and color. She is also very beautiful. She is only 22 years old this year, but she has been married to Hannah for 4 years and gave birth to 2. Baby Olaf and his cousin walked into the hall and sat down on the innermost sofa. The arrival of Fenrir showed that all the important people needed to sign the contract have arrived, and Olaf did not delay. He took out the contract to tell some plans and original intentions of the establishment of Shacklemnia Breeding Company, and then the original shareholders write your own name at the end of the 154 shares column, and write your father Hader's name after 100 shares. This means that Hader and his son occupy 254 shares, and the rest share 746 shares. When Olaf signed the names of the father and son on the 2 contracts, Vanhill and many other paddlehead ladies signed on behalf of all the Vikings. The women who attended the meeting were in the name of the paddlehead ladies, regardless of whether they could read or write. Sign the name or draw the letter code at the back. In the end, Olaf handed over a contract to Vanshur, and appointed her as the manager and plant manager of Shacklemyr Breeding Company. She was paid 20 shares in the position. These 20 shares were taken from Olaf's 154 shares are divided in the future. Fanshare will be responsible for the management and operation of the Shacklemyr Breeding Company and the overall work of the breeding plant. The remaining 27 Viking women workers will be managed and deployed by Fanshare, and at the same time will be taken from Olaf's shares. 10 shares are issued to reward some of the female workers for their superior performance. After Olaf announced the establishment of the company, he said several management rules that he had thought out. Then Van Hill stood up and spoke, saying nothing more than leading everyone to build a breeding company together and contributing to the development of Winland's aquaculture industry. Olaf knew that his cousin did not practice much at home. I was afraid that Heine helped to figure out the words she said after the inauguration ceremony and the signing of the contract of Shacklemyr Breeding Company were completed. Olaf did not speak, and Fanshare entered the roll. He looked at everyone and said, "I just counted them. There are no more than 200 households. Come here, please let me know when the meeting is over. Tomorrow, each of our 540 households will send a slave to the west of the outer city to wait. General Manager Olaf and I will lead everyone to build a breeding plant. The cattle, horses, pigs, sheep, chickens, ducks, geese, etc. that everyone has invested in can be raised in the pens only after the plant is built." The Viking women present here all agreed loudly to the first order made by Director Fanhill after taking office. Among these women, there are more than 30 Icelandic women, and almost all of them are here. The rest are white women, so there should be more. There are more than 200 women representatives of Bedak Viking families, but they may be afraid of staying with white Viking women. There is only one family here, and it is still a white man. The white wife of the Bedak family is the wife of the original Grand Rapids city priest and current OR leader Oris bought at a high price last year. She attended the meeting on behalf of her family and also became a shareholder of her own. Oris is only 20 years old this year, but he has shown great loyalty to Heir and Viking Raiding the year before last. This in exchange for Viking status and the status of adding Oris head, and now he is married. A white-skinned white wife, no matter what he thinks, in behavior and performance, he fully approves and supports the decisions of General Heir and Master Olaf. www.uxiaspit.com. So although Oris I don't know how to breed, but when I learned that my wife had raised chickens and ducks in Ireland, she ordered her to come to work and invest in shares. It can be said that Oris did not make money or lose money. Purely to support the second young Master Olaf. Olaf is also very familiar with Oris, the clever and astute Bedak Viking, and at the same time has some good feelings. When Vanhill finished speaking, Olaf said to Oris' wife, "You go back and tell Oris, ask him to mobilize all the Viking women under Adon. First go to talk to the director of Fanshare, get to know him, and then you can't delay the establishment of the factory tomorrow. If you share the shares, whoever will not come tomorrow, don't blame me for slashing your names in the contract. You can't participate if there is a good thing to make money in the future, Master Olaf. Don't worry. I'll tell Oris when I go back." The teenage white woman hurriedly bowed and agreed. The corners of her clothes flashed to reveal her legs, which seemed to be the result of malnutrition as a child, which caused stunted growth. Olaf also saw an Irish white slave with a big neck disease. He didn't know that Ireland was an island. Why was that person lacking iodine, knowing that there are so many weird diseases in this world, and they can't even be cured at all? Olaf was not surprised at all. He nodded and said, "Let's just say that. If you have breakfast tomorrow morning, please ask your madam to take your servants to the west. Build a factory on Po, https:// Genius remembers this site address in 1 second, mobile version reading URL. Chapter 158, Breeding Company Built. The next morning, Olaf had breakfast and rode to the west of the outer city with 2 strong slaves. Before entering, he saw hundreds of Viking women waiting with the same number of male slaves. The slaves squatted on the ground, their eyes dull and numb, and there were many tools such as shovel and wooden sticks beside them. The Viking women gathered together and talked, watching one party become depressed. One party is very lively, and it's just for people. The feeling of double heaven and ice. Olaf took a look, and saw that cousin Vanhill hadn't arrived before instructing all the slaves to level the land and clear the rocks and turf on the slope. After a while, hundreds of slaves got busy. Olaf looked for a while and heard messy footsteps behind him. He hurriedly went to see, but he saw Tom, Harik, Yaluki, Eriksson, Harry, Solrak and Val, 7 of Olaf's most ironic friends, Brought a dozen Icelandic teenagers and more than 20 private slaves. Why are you here? Now is the busy time for spring plowing. Olaf chuckled. I know, Olaf, your breeding company is about to start construction. How can we not help? Redhead Lickstrom, as the second person in Olaf's small group, speaks naturally on behalf of everyone. Olaf stepped forward and shook hands cordially with the younger brothers, and then smiled and said, I know you have to come. I heard that the slave warrior of my family who was with a white slave caught a whale yesterday. I will let someone bring it and we will eat it at noon. We also have it. I haven't been together for more than a month. Tom and others laughed and waved to let the slaves behind them join the ranks of leveling the land. Herit City in the White Hazel Forest is basically a village relocation, except for a few elderly people. More than 90% of the population have come to Winland at that time. Olaf's group of friends was the youngest Olaf, only 10 years old, and the other friends were over 14 years old. Now 3 years have passed, and the precocious Icelandic friends look at them almost as an adult. The eldest Yeluki and Val are exactly 18 years old this year. It's just that Olaf's IQ, EQ, identity, and even height suppress his friends, so even when he grows up, teenagers still respect Olaf and regard him as the backbone in this team with 8 Olaf as the core, more than a dozen Icelandic juvenile members, and dozens of Viking boys born in white slaves. Olaf has been working hard to maintain his future team, with the top 2 based on the foundation of the year. These young people are reciting stories such as the Romance of the Three Kingdoms and are keen to practice Viking warfare skills. Many teenagers stood together and talked. Although Olaf is only 13 years old, his height is already the second in the juvenile team, with a height of more than 180 centimeters, second only to the current 6 foot 2 inch, 188 cm, height of Herrick. Now the 17-year-old Halleck has entered the tallest body shape in Winland, basically the same as Hader, Nilanhu, Olav, and Kadir. If the nutrition can keep up, after waiting for a year or a half, he may surpass his parents and compete with Hagrid, the #1 master. Olaf knows that Iceland's human body is precocious. He begins to grow taller from about 10 years old. Normally, it ends at the age of 15 or 6. At the latest, he will complete development at the age of 17 or 18. Therefore, Olaf feels that he will have a future. The height shouldn't be necessary for the elder brother and the father to be short. At least there is room for growth of 8 or 9 centimeters. Olaf, who was not a big tall in his previous life, is very satisfied with his body in this life, so he often enjoys the feeling of looking down on others talking. Everyone was talking, and 7 or 8 white slaves who were proficient in construction technology also arrived. The contracted white slaves in Herit City were all slaves belonging to the Hader family. Therefore, Olaf wanted to mobilize a few people very easily, and arranged slaves when he went out. Just go and call. After the construction craftsmen arrived, Olaf took out a drawing from his arms. This is a drawing about the construction of the breeding plant that he finally drew after processing and thinking before going to bed. These days, Olaf is not an engineer, nor a designer. He just made a simple plan based on the topography of the west slope, and then pointed to the location of the drawing to tell the white slave craftsmen who will be responsible for the construction in the future how to lead the slaves to build the farm. In Olaf's plan, the 4 or 5 acres of soil should first be cleaned of weeds, shrubs and stones, and then shacks should be built at the highest position, and houses for workers to live in on the north side leeward, and the entrance and exit door. Then dug a manure storage tank in the low-lying place on the south side. From the manure storage tank to the stables and the semi-open activity sites on the slope, trenches are dug, and the is used to collect rainwater and sewage, and enter the manure storage tank uniformly. The west is not too far away from the river ditch on the west side. If workers are dispatched to dig a diversion canal close to it, it will be more convenient for the breeding plant to use river water in the future. In addition to the office buildings on the north slope, the stables on the slope, the activity area and the manure storage tank on the south side, a half-underground and half-ground feed storage warehouse will be built on the east side. Olaf handed over the drawings to the craftsman when he finished speaking. At this time Vanhild also rushed to the house with several private slaves. Although she did not know how to build a factory, she was already the manager of the breeding plant and the assistant of the breeding company. Naturally, I have to show my attitude, so I participated with great interest, consulted and understood all aspects of the work, and at the same time became a supervisor. After watching for a while, the Viking women who didn't feel interesting gave the slaves to Vanhild to manage them, and then they all left. Among them, there were more than 200 women from long Viking families, dozens of white women, and hundreds of them The Bedak women only found Vanhild and launched 2 representatives to apologize to her. First, Vanhild knew that the Wong Vikings were actually a little inferior, and she didn't even want to be entangled with the Bai Vikings. She relieved a few words, and then let them leave. Olaf and the others watched for a while, then temporarily asked their private slaves to assist Vanhild's cousin to supervise and manage the workers and slaves, and then took the teenagers back to Hatterberg to cook whale meat at noon. Olaf and the others drove a carriage with dozens of barrels of boiled sweet potatoes, and a barrel of whale meat stewed potatoes to the Zippo construction site. Hundreds of slaves stopped working to eat sweet potatoes and potatoes, while Olaf and others, the white slave craftsmen and fancier, used wooden plates and forks to eat whale meat with a flavor of tomatoes and coriander. When the meal was over, Vanhild ordered another half a bucket of broth with water to make 3 buckets of soup for the slaves to drink. After eating and eating, the white slave craftsmen continued to lead the slaves in the construction, because the site was cleared in the morning. www.wuxiaspit.com. Starting in the afternoon, the stones and wood piled up under the were moved up, and at the same time, they were transformed. Lay the foundation, and then use wood to make the roof and upper half of the wall. The white slave craftsmen process wood, some indigenous slaves process stone, and the others carry materials, and at the same time excavate houses, wall foundations, manure storage tanks, ditches, etc. The air on the west gradually began to smell of sand, but over time, most of the foundation of the breeding company was dug out. The Shacklemnir breeding company started construction on March 4, and it gradually took shape by the middle of the month. More than 560 people work every day. This makes the construction progress very fast, even because of the previous construction of He. The experience accumulated by Root City makes this construction more efficient than before, because the main buildings of the breeding company are the 5 houses on the northern and some sheds on the slope. The rest are digging pits and trenches and building wooden fences, etc. It can be said that the construction is not difficult, so it has been basically completed by the time it enters April. Up Vanhild, the supervisor for the past month, has been tanned a bit and thinner, but seeing the establishment of the breeding company a little bit by bit, she is very satisfied. But on the contrary, she has become more and more motivated because the basic structure of the breeding company has been completed, and the rest is the expansion of the pens inside. It is said to be ready for use, so Vanhild has been urging Olaf to mobilize livestock into the pens since the end of March. https://Genius remembers this site address in 1 second. Mobile version reading URL. Chapter 159, Insufficient Capacity. After April 2nd, Olaf walked into the basically completed breeding company and inspected it. After he came out, he asked Vanhild to notify all the shareholders to send in the share money, so from the afternoon of the 2nd, Vikings brought sheep, chickens, ducks, geese, pigs, cows and horses to the Zippo company in an endless stream. After Olaf and Vanhild checked and compared them, the female workers brought them in. Stables. The workshop of Shacklemnir breeding company has 15 pens, of which 3 are cow pens and 3 stables, 4 are pig pens and 4 sheep pens, and 1 pen is for polyculture of chickens, ducks and geese. Birds. In addition to these conventional livestock and poultry in the breeding company, there are also 5 huskies. At this time, Urho is still a hunting dog, and the excellent funny genes have not been able to emerge. These 5 dogs are all good breeds raised by the Akismo. The hunting dog is the best helper when catching seals in winter, so basically every Inuit tribe returns to Sidiang with a litter of the Akismo. Hader also had a litter last year, and now he has given birth once, resulting in a long-term number of 7 or 8 outside Hader fort. Seeing Hader, Olaf and other owners come back, they wag their tails and move up. It's just that Olaf himself doesn't like keeping pets, so he pays little attention to cats, dogs, and dogs. He doesn't play with these smelly dogs on weekdays. This time he took slaves from his home in order to guard and protect the farm. The 5 fattest animals are going to be kept in the factory to take care of the nursing home. By the next morning, there were also Viking women with slaves leading sheep and pigs. It was not until the evening of April 3rd that Olaf and Vanshare checked one side before confirming that all the animals and crossbows were in place. At present, the circle is almost full. There are 14 cows, 11 horses, 115 sheep, 23 pigs, 322 chickens, ducks and geese, and 27 Viking female workers are in place today. And my mother, a mixed horse with some Arabian ancestry, was sent here. This horse is a stallion and needs to be fed well. In the future, the horse bred will be improved, and we will rely on it to add a cavalry to our Viking thunder, Fanhill smiled and said to Olaf, I let these women workers familiarize themselves with this situation this afternoon, and I also took out the distiller's grains and potato residues from the fodder warehouse and fed them once. Cousin Vanhill, you did a great job. Olaf nodded, and then asked, how do you plan to arrange the safety of the farm at night? My 2 private slaves will live in the breeding factory in the future. They can run an errand for me, and they should be fine. Fanchir seemed confident of his slaves. Olaf was a little worried, and said, I plan to leave 2 contracted white slaves to live in the company. They are also employees. I can add some security forces at night. What do you think? Very good. Vanhill shrugged and said, just do it. Olaf and Fanhill left 2 yellows, 2 whites and 4 slaves riding on his own hybrid horse. Olaf thought that there are now 40 or 50 Wendland horses, but most of them are wagon horses and stray horses. Only 7 can be used as war horses for riding. Among them, the stables in Hatterberg, there are 3 horses in it, 2 in Uncle Kadir's family, 1 in Uncle Hagrid, and 1 in Hudik's family. Hatterberg's 3 horses have one of the long-term rides of his father Heir, 1 is riding on his own, and the other is taken to Bakens by his brother Olaf. Kadir also took 1 to Plymouth. Now there are only 4 horses of the highest quality that can be used as war horses to train cavalry. The batch from Kadir's family has also been sent to the breeding factory. In the future, we will have to increase purchases and breeding. We have to make more and more high-quality horse breeds of Wendland. If we want to expand to the North American continent in the future, we must have a powerful cavalry that can come and go like the wind on the vast expanse of land. Indigenous people who can't resist. The cost of governance will be too high. After the breeding company was officially operated, the hundreds of pounds of residue produced by sugar workshops and wineries every day after producing malt sugar and distilling alcohol were brought back to the warehouse of the breeding company by women workers and slaves in ox carts. Most of the time cows, horses, sheep, pigs, chickens, ducks and geese and other animals can eat the first day's feed every day. However, the female workers only carry out simple feeding and care every day. Most of the time, 4 indentured white slaves and slaves stay with them. In the factory, the role of these 27 Viking women is just to teach the 4 slaves how to take care of livestock and animals, how to deal with simple diseases, deliver births, and milk them. In addition to feeding, the Viking female workers also milk cows and shear sheep every day. When they have time, they drove ox carts and carts out to mow the grass. The fresh grass that could not be eaten was dried and stored, and the manure had to be cleaned. It can be said that the breeding company is very busy every day, and the workers have many things to do. Olaf was still waiting for observation in the breeding plant at first, but later found that everyone was paying attention, especially the cousin Vanhill arrived early in the morning and returned at night. This made Olaf feel relieved about the breeding company. First, he gave a feed production guide that he wrote to cousin Vanhill, and then gradually reduced the number of visits to the breeding factory, and paid close attention to the factory and bone china workshop, sugar workshop, and wine workshop. In turn, Olaf has unknowingly opened a handicraft factory, a sugar factory, a winery and a porcelain factory in Wendland, which can be regarded as supporting half of Wendland's export products. In April, the people who hate are scattered all over the world have completed the task. Thousands of large maple trees and more small and medium-sized maple trees on Vinland Island have been sapped and boiled for sugar to provide the Vinland sugar industry. In addition to the mountain of maple syrup, the goods in the warehouse, such as leather goods, dried meat, and dried fish, are also increasing because the malt sugar workshop has been producing continuously for years. More than 6,000 pounds of malt sugar have been produced in 3 months, which are stored in clay pots and placed neatly in the warehouse. The brewery started in the spring, and brewing and distillation were carried out at the same time. The tens of thousands of gallons of puree produced a year ago were distilled and processed into water of life, and then sealed in wooden barrels for storage. At present, there are more than 10,000 gallons of storage capacity. There are more than 1,000 barrels in total. 8 or 9 million pounds of sweet potatoes in the cellar have now been consumed. More than 300,000 pounds. If this amount is for people to eat, it will be enough to feed more than 10,000 people in Herat. It's been half a month. Based on the consumption and output ratio, Olaf estimated and concluded that basically consuming 8 pounds of sweet potatoes or potatoes can produce 1 pound of maltose, and consuming 27 pounds can produce 1 gallon of distilled wine. Olaf remembers that before the reform and opening up of the Chinese dynasty, the sweet potatoes used in rural winemaking were 3 caddies per caddy. This calculation is almost the same, But the quality of the water of life is not as high as that of later generations of shodshu, but it may also be the original variety of sweet potatoes. There is no reason for the high starch content of the high yield and high quality varieties improved by later generations. Olaf feels that if it continues to produce at the current rate, it consumes more than 100,000 pounds of sweet potatoes and potatoes a month on average. The efficiency is too low. It can only consume more than 1 million pounds a year, even 1/8 of the cellar. The grain stored in a cellar now is a little more than half of the grain grown on more than 2,300 acres of land last year. This year, due to the increase in arable land and the doubling of the planting of potatoes and sweet potatoes, the harvest will be 2 to 3 times that of last year if no surprises. Then from this year onwards, the winery and sugar factory will have to expand and increase equipment, and a few more must be opened. The expansion of the production line is the only way to convert as much grain as possible into high-value commodities such as malt sugar, starch, and high-grade spirits that can be stored for a long time. https://Genius remembers this site address in 1 second. Mobile version reading URL. Chapter 160, End of Spring Plowing. Before falling asleep, Olaf dipped the ink with a quill pen and wrote in his notebook the top priority to be done this year. The first thing is to expand the production lines of the winery and sugar factory, which requires the purchase of more equipment, tools in Europe, windmill, water wheel equipment and so on. Since writing this year's plan, Olaf simply wrote more. Second, we will purchase as many cotton seeds and other plant seeds as possible. This year we will strive to establish a cotton planting base in the southern plains of Quebec. Third, buy a spinning machine to prepare for the spinning of cotton. Fourth, looking for recruiting Arab doctors and aiming Chinese medicine, and at the same time buying Daming and European science and technology books. Again, Olaf wrote roughly 6 items according to the priority of the matter, and finally read it again before putting away the notebook to sleep. Time is always not enough in the hearts of busy Winland people. The spring plowing that swept through the cities of Herald, Heir, and Bakens ended one after another around April 7th and 8th. The 5,000 acres of arable land around Woodland's real food base Herat City and the newly reclaimed acres of land near the Avalon Forest to the north are all planted with seeds, and the first is through the rivers and ditches open up during the land reclamation. Watering of the 6,000 acres of land, more than 4,600 acres are planted with sweet potatoes, and corn, and the remaining rye, etc. And the newly reclaimed 1,000 acres belong to Heir, although they are also dominated by potatoes and sweet potatoes. All food and vegetables are planted in a distributed manner. Vinland's climate is inherently cold, coupled with the influence of the Little Ice Age. This has allowed Vinland to only grow crops that are hardy and grow in half-year cycles. If it is not fertile primitive land that has not been developed for tens of thousands of years, plus Olaf's selection by the way, high-yield crops and the promotion of fertilizer technology to improve soil fertility, not to mention the development of the economy, the Vikings are now a top priority in the normal development of the North American colonies. The British, French, and Dutch colonies developed slowly, and even the colonial extinction happened frequently. The first major difficulty that bears the brunt is that it is difficult to solve the problem of food because the North American colonists first came for fur and cod. They did not pay much attention to cultivated land to grow food and were not good at them. The supply completely relied on trade with the natives. It was not until the colonies of the 3 countries gradually developed planting after the 1720s. Barely eaten up. The second major problem that restricts them is the low resistance to diseases and the backward awareness of prevention and control under the backward production and living conditions. More than 10 years ago, a colonial stronghold was wiped out due to the outbreak of smallpox in New England. Dozens of people were almost extinct within 2 years. The problem was that they suffered from malnutrition and low resistance due to poor food and clothing, and don't know how to prevent and control the disease, so that in recent years, the increase of thousands of people in New England every year will kill as many as 70% to 80% in just 1 or 2 years. The third reason is the problem of the outbreak of war between the colony and the indigenous Indians with a large population and strong temperament. The indigenous people have a strong sense of territory. If the colony wants to develop, it will expand the land. Naturally, it will inevitably conflict with the indigenous people. Moreover, the arrogant European colonists looked down on the primitive and backward indigenous people at all, and were more prone to conflicts when they got along. So basically, except for France's 1 or 2 tribal allies now, New England also tried to win over the indigenous people after many losses. Support the Erkoiligas for New Netherlands. This colony is worthy of being established by the merchant country. From the beginning, it bought the nearby tribes through commercial activities, and explicitly purchased the land through the items needed by the indigenous people, and sold it to the colonial merchants of the country. Slowly city development. Vinland originally stood firm because of the different location and the valor of Hagrid and others over the British and French colonists. However, the pace of development in the first 8 years was also very slow, until Heir and Olaf brought more than 100 Icelands. Only after people joined, did there rise rapidly under the improvement of many aspects. However, the first step to a real rise is to rely on breaking the fur for New France and the royal jelly product developed by Olaf. After the snowball effect of the first bucket of gold, the large increase in white slaves and sharp weapons swept Vinland Island. Then the second step of the rise is the high-yield crop potato, sweet potato, and the three sisters developed by Olaf. If we generalize flatly, Vinland's rise and rapid development are actually wave after wave, and there is no pause at all during this period. This year is a brand new year to completely solve the food worries. Olaf knows very well that this year will be a key year for the full potential and promote the rapid development of Vinland, because of the fur industry's fur, the sugar industry's syrup, caramel, and sugar industry. The value of the high spirits, bone china and other commodities in the wine industry will exceed that of last year, and the abundance of food also marks the beginning of this year in Vinland, Greenland, and the Basque City. They can expand and capture slaves without worrying about population expansion. The economy and population have soared at the same time. How can Vinland not take off again? There were dozens of indentured white slave militias and 3,000 Bietak slaves under Heir cities Jod and Hoskerd. Most of these slaves belonged to Viking raiding, and a few were private slaves of the two. Since the establishment of a basic camp, they have planned to expand the city-states and docks, and at the same time reclaim the land for the cultivation of potatoes, sweet potatoes, corn, pumpkins, and beans. After months of unremitting efforts, more than 1,000 acres of arable land have also been cultivated. After the spring plowing, potatoes and sweet potatoes have been planted on 80% of the land, and the remaining 20% have three sisters and a small amount of vegetables. Of course, while developing infrastructure and agricultural planting, Hoskerd also personally led a team to hunt and fish, accumulating a small amount of fur and a large amount of dried fish, and preparing to personally send it back to Grode in April. City, supplement the goods sold in Europe this year. The same situation as Heir City is in the city of Bakens. The governor of Bakens, Blackstone, is also instructed by the white slave farmer who sent potatoes and sweet potatoes during spring plowing. www.uxiaspit.com to the south side of Lake Bakken. Sweet potatoes and the three sisters were planted on the vast land, and small tribes around were ordered to also plant them. The furs obtained from hunting in the west last winter and the dried fish caught and sun-dried in the Bakkens Lake and other water systems are also piled up. Black Rock wants to meet his master, Viking raid, General Heir. So as soon as the spring plowing in April ended, Blackstone began to prepare the goods, and at the same time sent someone to the agricultural technical instructor to the city of Herut, and reported to Heir that he would personally the goods to the city of Herut to meet him. Unlike the cities of Bakkens and Heir on Vinland Island, the distant Basque city and Olaf Hadarsson of Plymouth City personally led the fur and jade that were stationed in the two places for a long time. At the end of March, wealth, such as Gautaugen, and dried fish, left the two places, leading some of their subordinates on the long Viking ship and the two armed merchant ships that remained in the two places a year ago to the city of Herod in the corner of the southeastern peninsula of Vinland. The news was that the governors of the two places sent people over to say hello when the spring plowing was lively, and then they sent someone to inform them before they set off. Heir and Olaf knew clearly that Olaf and Kadir should be in the fourth. I arrived in Port Herod one after another after May 5th. Heir and other relatives, as well as Kadir's wife and family, who had been separated for several months, looked forward to it every day. They sent people to the port to guard, and wanted to see their son as soon as possible, friends, husband, father, https:// Genius remembers this site address in 1 second, mobile version reading URL. Chapter 161, Dinner. At noon on April 5, 1630, the port of Groote sailed into a tall armed merchant ship and 8 long vessels of primitive Viking craftsmanship that were several numbers smaller. Vinland's long Viking boats were built by Icelandic people using the handicrafts inherited from their ancestors and shipbuilders using wood planks and lap joints. Because of the rough and primitive craftsmanship and simple requirements, the wood processing is far inferior to that of the current Netherlands. The methods used in places such as the United Kingdom, Portugal, and Portugal are much worse in terms of durability and sturdiness. However, the Viking longboat can be built under the backward production and living conditions of Wenland, even if it is the result of everyone's concerted efforts, so there is no people make comments after the ship docked. The tall Kadir and his Viking soldiers walked off the plank. Kadir is 40 years old this year, but his body is still very strong. He is only 2 years younger than Catelyn, but he respects his sister very much, and treats her sister's children as if he is his own. That's because when he was a child, his sister was very strong. Love her, but also because of their deep affection, Kadir and Hoskard would rebel willingly to kill the officers and soldiers for their brother-in-law. After the soldiers on the ship were all disembarked and lined up, Kadir, dressed in a woolen striped robe and a white wolf leather jacket, staggered off the ship like a polar bear, with a hangover of yesterday's parting party on his face. Trace at this time, Heir, Katrin, Olaf, Fanchir and other 5 or 6 relatives have arrived at the dock in a bullock cart or on horseback. My dear sister, brother-in-law, my Stessina, Fanhill, I want to kill you in Plymouth. Kadir and Heir hugged his wife and daughter after hugging, and finally touched Olaf's head and said, my blonde boy also came to pick up my uncle. What gift did you bring me? Olaf was not polite, and asked for a gift. Haha. Kadir laughed, then waved his hand to let the soldiers behind him move 2 boxes, and at the same time there were 2 Calvin priests who were 40 or 50 years old. One box was open to reveal neatly stacked skins with a charming luster, and the other box was full of coffee beans. Obviously, this was a gift from Plymouth by Kadir. This is the gift I brought back. Wait for Olaf, you pick it first. I tell you, this coffee bean is roasted and then pulverized and cooked. It will have a strange aroma, add sugar and milk, it tastes great up. Olaf was really happy. He felt that he was about to be unable to stand the weird Nordic recipes. He was very much looking forward to having coffee, so he obediently thanked his uncle. Are these 2 priests you brought from Plymouth? Heir looked at the 2 priests and asked Kadir. Kadir nodded and said, these 2 are Priest Dracula and Priest Dukeo. They are both knowledgeable and kind elders. After I got your order, I invited them to establish churches and schools. Thank you 2 elders for coming. Heir wanted to thank the 2 pastors. They crossed their chests politely and said, Your Excellency Heir, we are all inspired by the merciful Lord. Vinland needs the Lord's children to spread the gospel. Kadir is still very relieved when he is doing things. Heir, this wife and brother has been the leader of a village for more than 10 years. The 2 pastors must be honest people who are very good at mastering them. So they are very kind and polite, and immediately so he ordered the 2 to make bullock carts to arrange a place to rest and eat, and wait until the afternoon to choose a location for them to build a church and school. Half an hour later, Heir and others returned to Groot. Knowing that Kadir and the hundreds of Viking soldiers he brought back were homesick, Heir waved his hands and said, you go home first, and wait till night. Come to my fort, I will take care of everyone. I heard that there was a dinner, and all the Viking soldiers cheered and shouted loudly like long live the general. Kadir also took his wife, daughter, and son-in-law Heine, who had just rushed over, back to his house. Katrin was very happy today, but after Kadir left, she was a little confused, and whispered, when will Olaf come back? Quickly, Heir showed his wife comfortingly. Olaf glanced at the small bucket of coffee beans held by his slave behind him, and smiled. Let's go home first. How about the coffee that Kadir brings? I heard that this new type of drink is only enjoyed by royal families in Europe. Stuff. After hearing Olaf's words, both Katrin and Heir became interested, and after a few words of laughter, everyone returned to their castle. Hundreds of people gathered in Hatterborg that night, and 2 priests were also invited into the hall to sit with the Kadir family. Before long, 7 or 8 kinds of meat including fried whale meat, grilled seal meat, salted cod meat, boiled lamb, smoked venison, etc. made by the chefs of Heir's furniture slaves and white slaves were brought out, and then they were divided in front of everyone. For processing, there is also a large pot of haggis soup sprinkled with raisins and hazelnut brown bread, sweet potatoes, and other foods. A large pot of maple syrup and caramel syrup is placed next to it, and it is prepared when everyone eats the bread. The aroma of many meats, pasta and sweets permeated the hall, and even floated outside, making the banquet participants could not help but move their apples, blinded by the spitting in their mouths. The candle braziers made of animal fats in the hall were all lit, and there were also braziers set up outside the court. The flickering candlelight and the flashing fire lighted the lights of Heidelberg brightly, like daylight, in the eyes of the 2 English priests. It was like a back. It's the same in St. Paul's Cathedral in London. After a while, Hayter clapped his hands, and the protagonist, who was more important to the banquet and the arrival of the Vikings, was about to appear. Soon Hayter's slaves moved in more than a dozen barrels of high spirits. Is this a spirit made by Olaf Distillery? I heard someone say it as soon as I returned to Harrod City. It is said that it tastes beautiful, Kadir asked with a smile. Hayter smiled and said, yes, this is their water of life produced by Olaf Distillery. I drink it much stronger than whiskey. My warriors from Vinland are back. Let's drink some tonight. Good wine, thank you for your generous general. The heroic acknowledgments came one after another, and finally came together into one sentence. The sonorous power of the words and the decisiveness of the men made the two English priests who first saw the true style of Viking men jump, and their hearts couldn't help but bang. Bumping wildly, the participants of the banquet are all Viking men who have experienced many battles. Among them, there are White Vikings and Wan Vikings. Among the White Vikings, there are Icelanders, Irish, and Scots. Among the Yellow Vikings, there are Inuit and Shellfish. Odd people, but now they all speak fluent Icelandic in a unified way, blending into Vinland's unique New Viking culture. The so-called New Viking national culture www.uxiaspit.com is actually a rudimentary culture based on Icelandic traditional customs and culture, integrated into Christian culture and customs, and based on the Icelandic language. In essence, it is not sufficiently viscous. With the spread and promotion of Christianity there will be separation. After all, Christian culture is dominated by Latin, French, etc. Once Christianity spreads in Vinland, Icelandic culture cannot become the dominant position because there are problems in the new Viking culture. Olaf wanted to integrate the traditional Nordic polytheistic culture with the Christian culture, so as to increase the foundation and not to be deviated. The night is getting deeper and deeper. Hundreds of people are sitting in the hall and in the corridors outside the hall and feasting, tasting the spirits, chewing and chatting and praising the spirits. There are no Viking men who grew up in the bitter cold land who do not love wine. They drank the water of life that surpassed the previous beer, wine, and even whiskey, and the applause rang out one after another. This is the wine a man should drink. Yes, water of life. This name couldn't be more appropriate. Master Olaf is extraordinary. If you can brew such a powerful spirit, we will be blessed in the future. Viking Masters, it's, haha, https:// Genius remembers this site address in 1 second. Mobile version reading URL. Chapter 162, Wenlin and number 039, S teaching direction. A dinner party was so lively that it was late at night when it was over. With the support of their families, the Vikings left Hatterborg drunk. The Hudic, Hagrid, Cadiles, Heinz and other high-level officials and Hayter and Catelyn also drank too much. This was their first time drinking a lot of water of life, so when the stamina is up, I can't stand it anymore. Olaf is okay. He only drank 2 cups with his friends. Relying on the advantages of height and weight and strong physique, he only felt a little drunk, and then fell asleep with bubble feet. In the morning of the next day, another news came from the dock, saying that Master Olaf, the governor of the Basque city, had also returned with 30 Vikings. Ulf is here too. Catelyn, who was packing her things in the room, ran out and asked excitedly when he heard what Heine had sent to Olaf Hadarsson. Yes, brother is back. After Olaf nodded, Katrin turned around to get the clothes, then frowned and said, then let's go to the dock to pick him up. This kid must not eat well during the winter in the Basque country. I don't know if I lost weight. After half an hour, Olaf and Hayter, Katrin, Half, and Galni met Olav with more than 30 people on their way to the pier. Olav has a green stubble on his chin. He is wearing a black bearskin robe that Hayter gave him. Underneath is a tall and healthy horse of black and white. He saw Hayter and the others hurriedly hit the horse, then rolled over and got off the horse. Hugs with his father, mother and younger brother, and then squeezes the faces of younger sister and younger brother Gurney. Do you miss your brother? Gurney wiped his face with disgust, and turned his head away with a cold snort, but his eyes were still paying attention to his elder brother. Seeing the appearance of the little girl, everyone laughed in unison. Olav took out a string of white jade beads from his arms, handed it over and said, this is a necklace made by letting people grind into beads from walrus tusks. I will give you this necklace one's gift. Gurney took it and put it on with joy, and then smiled and kissed his brother. Olav smiled, took out another longer one and handed it to his mother, and said, this is your gift, my child has grown up. Catelyn took the necklace and then reached out and stroked Olav's face. Feeling a little rough on the skin, she said distressedly, How are you doing in Basque? Have you suffered? I am the Basque governor who rules the western part of Labrador. How can I suffer? Olaf slapped his chest and smiled. Mom, don't worry. Your son is 22 years old. When my father was this old I went to sea 3 times and married you. After a few words, everyone returned to Hatterborg, and then another banquet was held that night, but the scope of the banquet was only limited to the seniors, relatives and friends above the head priest Dracula and priest Dukea were also invited to attend the family dinner and get acquainted with Olaf before the start of the banquet. Hader clearly told the two that he was going to build a church and school on the east side of the inner city, which would be managed by the two at that time, but now they can only wrong the simple dwellings they were allocated to them. First, we will do mass and teach the Viking children literacy, singing hymns, mathematics and other cultures. Dracula and Dukeo are the most docile and honest people among the Plymouth Puritans. Cadal demonstrated his courage and force many times when he became the King of Plymouth. He led a team to wipe out a Plymouth approach a year ago. The Pecker tribe killed more than 40 indigenous warriors and captured more than 50 men and women as slaves. Therefore, the status of Kadir in Plymouth is getting higher and higher, and the nominal leaders such as McGonagall are more and more submissive to Kadir. The letter received by Kadir from Hader last month made Hihort City prepare to build a church and a school. The next generation's education issues, and at the same time, Hader told him that in order to choose a good person to control, he must ensure that Hader does what he asks the priest to do. Kadir always thought that Hader and Olaf had plans to reform Protestantism. He only ordered the two most honest and timid Puritans, who had also gone to college, and brought them personally. After hearing what Hader said, Dracula and Dukeo first glanced at Kadir and saw that he had not changed. Then they got up and thanked him. Thank you for your care of your excellency, Hader. The conditions in the New World are backward, everything is simple, and there is a place to live and teach. You can rest assured that we will teach the Viking teenagers in Wendland with our heart, but I don't know where you will teach us. The two old priests are worthy of being mature. They are very clear about their identities. They also know that Wendland's mission is to teach young people cultural knowledge, and at the same time lead a church. Nothing else can be intervened, nor is it possible to intervene. So when facing future teaching and even missionary work, the two consciously set their attitudes and asked Hader if the purpose is to know how to master their degrees. Hader was very satisfied with the attitude of the two priests, so he was more assured that Kadir managed Plymouth City. Hader glanced at Olaf. Olaf stood up naturally, and said in English, "Two respected elders, what my father meant is that I hope you two will focus on the language and science industry and teaching in the future. Hymns, don't tell too many Bible stories for now." The two old priests frowned when they heard the words, and they wanted to say something. But they didn't limit it to say something about it. They just said that they would not talk for a while. Thinking of Kadir's harsh methods, Dracula took the lead with a light cough and said, "Okay. I listened to Lord Hader's instructions. By the way, there is one more thing to ask the two elders. That is, the indigenous slave language and culture are primitive and rude. In order not to be harmed, please do not contact the indigenous people at will in the future. We will send a white slave militia to protect you. Be safe, and meet your two needs in life at the same time." The words added by Olaf made Dracula not think deeply. They are not the kind of high-minded and faithful believers of Elder Brest, and they do not have the demeanor of a leader. They just want to do their own thing in peace. So I didn't realize the consequences of not being able to contact the Native Americans and have no chance to preach to them, or that I realized that I didn't care about it, but thanked Hader for protecting them. After a little chat, the night became heavier and heavier. 7 or 8 lights were added in the hall, and the room became warmer and brighter at this time. The chefs brought out the grilled meat, cooked meat, sausage, fried fish and other foods, and then put them in a wooden tray and put them in front of everyone. Several other indigenous female slaves poured the water of life from the bone china bottle into the porcelain cup and served it to everyone. Hader raised his glass and said a few words, and the banquet to welcome Olaf back home kicked off. After a reception, Olaf, who had been drinking too much, excitedly dragged Olaf to tell him, Heine and others about his operations in the Basque city, such as hunting and fishing, expanding the city-state, building toilets, manure storage tanks and land reclamation outside the city, ready to grow high-yield crops. Hearing what Olaf said was organized and process. It can be seen that he is doing well in the Basque city, but Olaf and others also know that Olaf does not need to play too much, just need to move the Vinland model over. The main factor that plagued the development of Basque country has been solved. He only needs to make good use of the slaves, soldiers and other manpower in Iceland. The temperature and climate of Basque Country is far colder than that of Herat in the southeastern peninsula of Vinland. It can be said that the climate temperature plus the disturbance of the Little Ice Age is basically the same as the climate in northern Iceland. Only cold-resistant rye can be grown. Moreover, due to the long winter, the growth cycle of the wheat seedlings is short, so the yield during the early winter harvest will be lower than that of planting in warmer areas. www.uxiaspit.com. But now with spring and summer planting, it can be as fast as 3 or 4 months. There are harvested potatoes and sweet potatoes. Olaf also gave up the middle black wheat. Instead, he planned to bring some sweet potatoes when he returned in a few days. Plant them when it gets warm at the end of April, and wait until October when it starts to be cold. At that time, even if the output is lower, it will not be lower than the sweet potato that Olaf planted outside the city of Groot last summer. Regarding the idea of Olaf wanting to grow sweet potatoes in the Basque Country, Olaf, the younger brother of Professor Sweet Potato who has become a potato expert, has a great say. He naturally fully supports his brother and reminds him that the temperature and climate of Basque is better than Vinland. The northern part of the country is still worse, so the crops grown in the alpine zone can only grow for 6 months from the end of spring to the end of autumn. The climate is not good, and the growth is slow. Naturally, the yield will not be ideal. Come on, this will be much better. Olaf nodded happily, but he had already drunk too much, and it would be hard to say whether he would remember it when he woke up tomorrow. Kadir and Olaf returned to Herat city for 2 or 3 days. Hader, Hagrid and others fainted for 2 or 3 days. Perhaps they were almost drunk because of happiness, but fortunately the middle and lower oarheads and production, the captain and Hannah were able to carry out their work as usual, so there was no problem with Groot City. https://Genius remembers this site address in 1 second, mobile version reading URL. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 163, Go to Sea. Thousands of slaves and more than 1,000 white slaves have been busy for 5 days and finally moved all the goods in the 4 warehouses of Hader Fort, the military fort, the chamber and the olive factory in the city of Groot to 18 ships. The cargo holds of the 18 merchant ships are already full of commodities and supplies. It can be said that this time the fleet is not only the harvest of more than 10,000 people in Winland, but also the governors of Basque City and Plymouth City. Land searched a lot of wealth when Olaf and Hudic exchanged. Hader ordered the governors of each region to obtain 10% of the wealth they had collected for the Viking Thunder, and at the same time the wealth acquired by the Vikings should be protected according to the latest regulations. About 5% of the goods in the Viking fleet must be distributed to the Vikings and the 2 governors after they are realized, as the Vikings now not only rule Vinland, but also divide their forces to manage the Basque City, Labrador region and Plymouth City, resulting in fewer and fewer manpower available to Hader. In order to cultivate new talents and increase their strength, Hadal told Blackstone and Olaf to speed up the arrest of the natives of the West and the natives of Labrador. Hader originally had 1,000 Viking soldiers, about 1,000 White Wolf soldiers, and 3,000 slave warriors, but now it is seriously inadequate after expanding the territory and dispatching troops to garrison and operate. Wenland's troop strength has been stretched and needs to be supplemented urgently. In the original force, Bakkens was stationed with 200 White Wolf soldiers, and nearly 600 Viking soldiers and 900 White Wolf soldiers were dispatched to Greenland, Basque City, Plymouth City and other places. Many slaves and warriors were taken away, and there were not many left in the spring of 1630, although the city of Groot still had a population of more than 8,000, and the cities of Basque Country and Bakkens also sent strong warrior slaves to supplement labor. Hader and Hudic were full of available soldiers. Still seriously inadequate, the strongest and most loyal Viking soldiers have only more than 400 men, and the rest are more than 100 White Wolf soldiers. Among the more than 100 White Wolf warriors, half of them were newly promoted when hunting white wolves in the past 2 years. Warrior last year, he brought more than 1,600 contracted white slaves. 600 girls and women became Viking wives. Therefore, they broke away from slavery and became noble Vikings. There are more than 1,000 contracted white slaves remaining. Because there are 600 single men, there are about 800 young men in total. Of these 800 men, 600 of them are Heudic who returned to Groot last year. The white slave militiamen who have been trained for a long time after being selected by the city rear have a certain fighting capacity. As long as they can fight a few times, they are good fighters. The remaining armed forces are very rudimentary. Even if they mobilize more than 5,000 slaves in the city of Groot and 3,000 slaves in the city of Hader, they can only make up 3,000 Biotic slave warriors, and their combat power and organization, the strength and discipline are completely incomparable with the white wolf soldier and the white slave militia, let alone the Viking soldier also. Hader couldn't let Wenland stop producing, and completely turn his manpower into soldiers to start a war. This would make Wenland's economy go backwards, and it would not meet the needs of the Vikings. Therefore, Heudic's point of view has always been very clear, that is, the standard that the Vikings are the core cannot be changed, but in order to enhance the armed forces and ensure that the city of Herat has the military strength that can suppress the natives and colonies in North America at any time, it must be healthy. Young white slaves and indigenous slaves were trained to train a white slave militia and indigenous slave militia to assist the Viking legion. This is the central task that the city of Groot needs to do in terms of arms. After all, Newly has enough young and strong labor, and the food in Harut city is completely enough to support the semi-producing by slave militia and the indigenous slave militia. The growth of the Vikings was very slow, but the native slaves could be quickly replenished as long as they were captured on the vast North American lands. In order to get a fighting army as soon as possible, Hader and Heudic, even Olaf and Olaf, they all focused their eyes on the Biotic savages in the mountain forests in the northwestern part of Vinland and the native Indians of Labrador Peninsula. After the first high-level meeting and discussion this spring, Hader clearly issued work targets to Governor Blackstone of Bakens and Governor Olaf of the Basque Country this summer. The two governors will send more than 5,000 slaves to the city of Harut. Hader is ready to use new slaves to gradually replace the old slaves, and supplement the manpower with the most loyal old slaves and some healthy and young new slaves. Under Heudic's strict training, he used contract white slaves and indigenous slaves to obtain a new slave militia team. According to various estimates, the total population of Vinland Island is about 20,000. Among them, Hader can effectively control about 16,000 people, and there are 13,000 people in the three city-states under full control. There are currently 4,000 to 5,000 people scattered in the western mountains and forests in various places. According to the military order that Blackstone patted his chest in front of Hader, it is obvious that this year he will capture a large number of idle savages in the northwest to Bakken City, and selected enough young people to use in the city of Harut to send Hader as a source of troops. The area of the Labrador Peninsula in North America is more than 10 times larger than that of Vinland Island. However, due to environmental geography and other reasons, there are not many native Indian populations living on this peninsula. Hundreds of Indian ethnic groups in the 17th century lived in large numbers in the east and west regions of the United States. The number of Indian ethnic groups in later Canada is not even one-third of that in the south. The population on the north bank of the St. Lawrence River is not as good as that on the south bank, and the population west of Quebec City is also far more than the east. So Olaf and Hader want to colonize North America. It is easy for the Labrador Peninsula, a sparsely populated and weak region. If you want to develop westward and southward, you will face a huge population and tribes. The complex, brave and combative native Indians. The Basque City currently controlled by Olaf, and the eastern corner of the peninsula currently has a population of only about 3,000. Among them, the Basque City originally had more than 1,000 people. Last year, some of the slaves were sent to the city of Groot, resulting in less than 1,000 people. There are 3 large tribes and 8 strongholds, totaling more than 2,000 people after being evenly divided with New France. This is the current team of Governor Olaf. Therefore, if Olaf wanted to complete the target, he had to attack and expand north and west. Olaf has been training troops in the Basque Country since he became the governor in the early winter of last year. He is ready to attack the northern and western regions, with the purpose of expanding the land and enslaving the indigenous people. This is what he has the same vision as his father's and more radical ambition. In addition to seeing his relatives and sending for goods, Olaf also wanted to get Hader's support for his expansion in materials, troops, and weapons. Hader had long known from Heudic that there were not many indigenous populations in Labrador, and the tribes were scattered and small, which belonged to a region that was vast and sparsely populated, although the cost of governance and management would be very high after the conquest. But Hader and the others are looting the population and increasing the scope of hunting for they have no plan to maintain the system after simple thinking. Hader decided to send the last remaining 100 White Wolf soldiers and 200 militiamen who had undergone Hudik's basic military training in the city of Grote. Hader will equip this batch of slave soldiers with full bodies. It is the first time in Wenland that slave soldiers can use plate armor such as plate armor and spears. This also shows that slave soldiers will be greatly reused in the future Wenland campaign after 100 White Wolf soldiers and 200 slave soldiers were brought back to the Basque city by Olaf. His men had 30 Viking soldiers and 300 Beothuk slaves, enough to gather 500 elite soldiers to sweep Lara. The small tribes of the Brado Peninsula are definitely not a problem since most people have important things to do this year. Hagrid and Olaf can only be responsible for this year's sea trips. www.wooxiaspit.com. It just so happens that Hagrid's wife Rolling Amore I found out that I was pregnant more than a month ago. When I learned that my dear husband Hagrid was going back to Europe, Rolling, who is reluctant to be separated from her husband for a long time, wanted to go all the way to Europe. She would like to take a trip home to share with her brothers and sisters and other family members. Good news: carrying family members is entirely Hagrid's personal freedom and rights, and no one raised any questions. Therefore, the upcoming trip to Europe will temporarily add a female passenger. After having a farewell dinner, the Hagrid couple and Olaf boarded an armed merchant ship docked in the port the next morning under the farewell of relatives and friends. This is the flagship of the Hader. On the morning of April 15th, Olaf and his uncle Hagrid led more than 20 Icelandic Vikings with very good sailing skills, more than 80 white Vikings who acted as sailors, more than 50 yellow Vikings, and 200 skilled men. A total of 345 people, agile and clever native slaves, left Port Grote by boat. 18 large draft ships left the port in full form after several days of maintenance and inspection, loaded with cargo and the eager anticipation of the Vinland Vikings, heading to the east quickly along the southwest wind. Up this time, it was the Wenland University who was still preparing for the long-distance business activities. Everyone had high hopes for Hagrid and Olaf, and both of them were optimistic about the market this year. https://Genius remembers this site address in 1 second, mobile version reading URL. Chapter 164, There are so many exports. At around 10 a.m. on April 9th, the governor of Bacan City, Blackstone, along with 10 white slave soldiers, 100 White Wolf soldiers, and 500 natives carrying leather goods and dried fish, arrived in Hrut City. Hadn't seen each other for more than a year. The originally black and thin Blackstone became a lot more white and fat. Wearing a leather jacket, wearing colorful feathers and a crown of high priest inlaid with the gold and jade, he first came to Haderborg to meet his master, General Hader. Hader's attitude towards Blackstone is completely different from that of Olaf, Kadir and others. Even if he learned of Blackstone's return, he did not greet him. Instead, he was at home waiting for him to visit him. This is the disparity in identity and at the same time as the ruler. Hader must also grasp the difference between closeness and estrangement. She squatted on the ground after entering the door, and shouted in fluent Icelandic, "Your faithful dog, Hishi, has seen the great master of the gods." Hader chuckled softly. "Get up." Black Rock slowly got up, and bowed to Katrin and Olaf, Half, and Gurney. One by one Hader waved him to sit down, and then said, "You are doing a good job in Bakans. I know it. If you have any difficulties, I will solve it for you." "No, master, there is no difficulty," Blackstone said, moved. "Everything about Blackstone is a gift from the master. I am satisfied. I don't dare to think too much." When Blackstone faced Hader, he was nervous and careful. It was so different from the way he covered the sky with one hand in Bacan City. This was due to his inner awe. After chatting for a few words, Hader saw Hishi's restraint and encouraged him a few words, and then Hishi respectfully said, "Your faithful servant, I brought you 2,000 furs and tens of thousands of dried fish this time, and 500 carefully selected young slaves. Please accept them." Last year, Hader was like Blackstone, who asked hundreds of young and strong slaves to fill the gap between Yad and Hoskard's lead to the construction of Hader City. Blackstone believed that the master had a need for young and strong slaves, so this time he also selected the best. 500 strong and clever people came together. Hader knows that Olaf intends to use the Basque city as a stronghold to continue to nibble and expand to the western continent. This echoes his idea. Now that the supply of food through potatoes, sweet potatoes and other crops Vinland is completely sufficient, the next step is to train enough elite troops. Colonial expansion to the mainland. Hader was very pleased with the act of sending 500 young men from Blackstone, and felt that he had not wasted the cultivation of this slave when Blackstone returned to Herat City, this time to visit Hayter and offer slave skin and dried fish. He also brought back news that he sent 3 mines in Changling Mountain to protect the 3 mine managers of Edward, Robert and Hunter. A message from his guard said that the northern iron ore mine is currently somewhat difficult to mine, and it will take a month to find the weakest area to dig. However, Robert's coal yard and Hunter's copper and gold mines have found mining locations and led dozens of slaves from the Blackstone Pass to conduct initial mining, and obtain some combustible coal slime, coal lumps, and extremely high content low metal penetration ore. The coal mines are better. Those slime coal blocks can be used directly, but it is very troublesome for the top layer of low-content permeable mines to collect the tiny metals inside. It requires more advanced and detailed equipment to crush and screen to extract. This can only I bought it from Europe. Hunter Trio not only informed Hayter about the mining situation and difficulties in the 3 mines, but also requested that sufficient tools and equipment be supplemented as soon as possible. At present, the slave miners in the 3 mines only have 3 or 4 picks, shovels and other tools. Most of them use stone tools, which are inefficient and easy to break. It can be said that the workload of 10 people a day is not as much as that of ordinary miners in England. In addition to equipment such as blast furnaces for smelting ores, tools such as pickaxes are also necessary tools for mining. After Hayter learned about it, he wrote down and plans to purchase some from Europe this year. After waiting for 2 days, Iad and Hoskard from Hayter City also returned. The crowd continued to lively for a few days, and then Hayter began to send people to the ship to carry the goods, the fur and dried fish of the warehouse in Grote City, plus the 4 areas of Basque City, Bacan City, Hayter City, and Plymouth City. The total volume of these 2 products, including fur and dried fish, has exceeded that of last year. The products prepared this year are all intercepted for personal use, and then divided into a large amount of dried fish and thousands of skins, as well as hundreds of thick woods, 200 barrels of wine, and 2,000 cans of maple syrup. These commodities are all the wealth that can be robbed of Chinese orchids and the surrounding areas in 1 year, because the total amount is nearly 20% more than last year. According to last year's price, a total of 234,000 pounds of silver should be sold. There are also 23,000 pounds of gold. Because these commodities are completely dependent on the labor of their Vikings and slaves, the cost is extremely low. Hayter and Heine have simply estimated that, except for the part to be distributed to all the Vikings, this year's basic income should still be comparable. It was flat last year. Nowadays, because of the constant wars in Europe, the prices of meat, food, wine, etc. have skyrocketed, and the prices of dried fish and wine will increase every year. This makes Hayter very happy. He feels that if he fights for a few years, he will earn more, especially this year. Wenland's products have added high-grade spirits, water of life and oriental malt sugar, starch and other products. Currently, the water of life is 1,300 barrels, the malt sugar is 6,200 pounds, and the starch is more than 500 lb. After discussing with Olaf, Hayter planned to keep 100 barrels of wine and 100 pounds of malt sugar for use, and the rest were shipped to Europe for sale. Whiskey is currently the only high-quality liquor in Europe, so the price is more than 20 times that of beer. A 10-gallon barrel can sell for 240 to 260 shillings, which is close to 14 pounds of silver. It is reasonable to say that the taste of the water of life should be higher than the price of whiskey. It is not worth worrying about selling, but just according to the price of whiskey, 12,000 gallons of water of life can also sell 16,800 pounds of silver. Now high spirits, it is also a new thing. High food prices have led to higher and higher prices for high-end wine. It has become a luxury that can only be drunk by wealthy merchants and nobles. Oriental malt can be sold if it is packaged, but if such a huge amount of royal jelly and malt can be sold at the same time, the price will definitely be depressed, and the sales cycle will not be too short. But 6,000 pounds of malt can be sold for at least 3,000 pounds of silver, and even more than 6,000 pounds of silver. The output value of the sugar factories and wineries that have been in operation for 4 months from last winter to the present has exceeded 20,000 pounds of silver, which is much better than any European factories, even the Spanish plantations in South America, which are planted annually. The income is only a few 100,000 pounds of silver. To calculate, Vinland's annual income has far exceeded the sum of New England, New France, and New Netherlands, and it is almost equal to 1/3 of Spain's colonial income in South America. In addition to the water of life, syrup, fur and other commodities, Wenland also has a big killer, that is, The bone china made by Olaf and potters for several months at present. 210 pieces of bone china with complete appearance have been fired according to the size, model and style. Among them, there are 7 sets of tea sets, and the rest are medium and large bottles in cans. The shape and style of these bone china are completely different from those imported from Europe, such as Daming official kills and folk kills, and at most some products are somewhat similar. The only advantage is that the porcelain is smooth in texture and classical in style. The disadvantage is that the shape is not beautiful enough and the color is single. It is mainly white porcelain. Although it cannot be compared with Daming porcelain at all, no one can say that this is not porcelain, so as long as the price is low, you can still sell it at present. A set or a pair of fine porcelain from Daming can be sold at high prices in Europe. www.uxiaspit.com. Ordinary official kill porcelain or private kill fine products can also sell for dozens of hundreds of pounds of silver. Even if it is the most common porcelain, one is not less than 1 mark or half a pound of silver. So the most profitable European merchants are the Far East maritime merchants who are engaged in porcelain, sugar, silk, and spices. The Dutch East India Company monopolizes 90% of the market share, dominates the huge market in the Far East. This is also the main reason for the rapid rise of a small country with just over 40,000 square kilometers and a population of just over 2 million. A newly independent United Kingdom and the Netherlands. More than 200 expensive bone china products are products that Olaf has high hopes for. Although the quantity is small and the quality is not very good, Olaf believes that the bone china manufacturing has the same status as the sugar industry and the wine industry. Olaf factory started operation and production last year. Most of the products were self-consumed. At the same time, some of them were bought in exchange for a small amount of fur and copper coins in the hands of the French and indigenous people. The 3 products of high spirits, caramel, and bone china are the real commodities that can be exchanged for wealth. Olaf also estimated that if they can be sold smoothly, the 3 export commodities produced by the Olaf factory will also create 30,000. The wealth of British pounds of silver is enough to buy 30 hardwood merchant ships stronger than Thor's hammer and hope. If you don't consider the armed issues, you can form an ocean-going caravan. If you install enough artillery, you can also support it. To purchase 10 normally armed ocean-going merchant ships, https://Genius remembers this site address in 1 second. Mobile version reading URL. Chapter 165, London. The world centers in the 1630s were Quanzhou and Daming and Amsterdam in Europe. The Asian business circle was controlled by the Zhangzhilan Group, and the European business group was the largest in the Netherlands. This phenomenon will exist for half a century. Until the demise of the Eastern Zheng Group and the demise of Taiwan and the defeat of the Netherlands by the British Navy, the Kingdom of Great Britain will cross 5 continents and 4 seas, becoming the dominant empire that never sets in the sun, and the French Empire, the strongest European power. Suddenly it was bright. After Olaf and Hagrid led the fleet to enter Port 8 under the semaphore of the port flag bearer for the first time, Olaf stood on the side of the ship and was still looking at London in the distance. Olaf and Hagrid walked for more than 10 days without danger at sea before they approached Ireland. As a result, they encountered a 3-ship pirate. After the battle, Hagrid personally led the soldiers to kill the 4 pirates without injury, and then the pirates suddenly calmed down and retreated when the fleet found its direction from the sea. It arrived in Dublin a week ago. It was delayed for 2 days and sold some caramel, royal jelly and fur, as well as 20,000 pounds of dried fish and 2 pairs of bone china, in exchange for more than 10,000 British pounds of silver, and Hager, Olaf and others were living in Amor's villa at the time of the transaction, and many of the goods were sold by Amor after that. Olaf and Amor talked about the 2 businesses of recruiting young Irish white slaves and helping Irish people purchase guns and ammunition. After leaving Rolling to reunite with their families, Hagrid and Olaf left with Amor's butler, Ireland, to London, the capital of England. Since Hagrid became the son-in-law of the Amor family, he was completely unable to discuss business with Amor because of his character. When he was young, he followed his elder brother, and Hader was responsible for business negotiations. Later, when he arrived in Vinland, he immersed himself in development for 2 years. When he became an adult, he took him to Europe to sell dried fish and leather goods. The negotiations with the merchants were mostly handed over to Olaf. Responsible, it will be completely handled by Olaf in a few years. Now that Olaf is coming together, Hagrid is worried that the continued white slave trade and arms purchase with his elder brother will cause losses to Wenland's interests. He decisively shows that this business activity is entirely in charge of his nephew Olaf. Olaf took advantage of the trend, and fought for several rounds with Amor's language, and finally negotiated 2 big deals. Amor worked hard to marry Hagrid's sister, who had died of his fiancée, but did not discuss it. When it was cheap, he jumped his feet again and again. In the end, Hagrid couldn't stand it, and promised to give his brother-in-law a cannon in his personal capacity. After receiving Hagrid's promise, Amor turned his anger into joy and personally bid farewell to Olaf and Hagrid after holding a family banquet. After leaving Dublin, Olaf and Hagrid prepared to lead the fleet directly to Amsterdam, the largest port in Europe, because only here can a large amount of goods in the fleet be consumed within 1 to 2 weeks. However, as soon as the fleet left the Irish Sea, 5 sailors suffered severe illnesses such as wind chill and leprosy. They knew that they were towed in the closed cabin, and soon more than 20 people on the entire ship would become ill, and they were in short supply. I couldn't survive on the medicine ship. In order to treat the patient as quickly as possible and reduce the risk, Olaf and Hagrid decided to go to London first, and then to Amsterdam. After treating the patient, Olaf originally thought that London, as the capital of the United Kingdom, would be a very prosperous and huge city, but when the ship docked on the Thames and surrounded the West India wharf of Douglas Island, Olaf clearly saw the golden light of the Western River in the setting sun. Shining, all kinds of low and dilapidated wooden houses and scattered fields and woods on both sides of the bank. Most of the villages are muddy dirt roads, only a 2 or 3 people wide gravel road extending from the dock to the north side of the river. It continued to spread to the northwest and disappeared in the woods and fog. This London's first impression of Olaf is not as good as Reykjavik, not as good as Dublin and Edinburgh, and it is not even worthy of shoes when compared to an international metropolis like Amsterdam. Hagrid walked out of the cabin and seemed to see Olaf's disappointment and contempt. He pointed to the west and said, "This is only the West Indies port in the east of London. I visited Hayter twice a decade ago. I didn't expect this port to be better than this. It used to be much bigger." Olaf came back to his senses when he heard the words, looked at the port, and found that hundreds of large ships and hundreds of small boats were docked at dozens of piers in the huge harbor. It is now in the afternoon, and the sailors on the big ship are busy. They use slats and cranes to carry the cargo of the ship to the small boat, or carry the cargo in the small boat to the big ship. There is a wooden bridge in the narrow area of the Thames on the east side of the port. The height under the bridge is limited. Small wooden boats go back and forth. Sailors sway the oars and shuttle back and forth in the bridge hole, carrying the goods on the pier to the west. Visible town 5 bridges further west are where the City of London and Whitehall Palace are located, Hagrid said, pointing to the Thames in the west. Olaf's heart moved, knowing that his current port is only the outer city of London, far away from the city centre, so if you want to get a glimpse of London in the 17th century, you have to walk some distance up the Thames. Hagrid saw Olaf's slight curiosity and hyperactivity, which looked like a teenager should have. He laughed, stroked his silver beard, and said, "Wait for me to get the tax. With a registration card, let's go to town and play." Olaf nodded, and then Hagrid first ordered someone to ask a doctor to see the sick sailor, and then took the 2 Icelandic Vikings off the ship to the management committee to pay the fee, get the tax card, and put it on the exchange. After the few items that have been on the ship, it is reasonable that a merchant will come to see the goods tomorrow morning. The weather in London is warmer than that in Welland. Hagrid ordered the good sailors and guards to take good care of the ships and cargo, and then exchanged leather jackets with Olaf, put on clean linings and trousers, and 5 strong jackets and linen robes. The Viking disembarked. After the 7 people disembarked, they did not walk to the west exit, and stopped a smallest wooden sampan. After Hagrid negotiated the price, everyone reluctantly sat, and the owner of the ship propped up the oars in his hand and pulled a few times, and the sampan slowly sailed away from West Indies port, upstream from the Thames River and heading upstream. After passing through 4 bridge holes in succession, Olaf saw the neat and beautiful 2-story buildings appearing on both sides of the Thames. The people walking along the banks and on the bridge are no longer just poor people and live wearing neatly dressed British people or carrying bags or carrying baskets on the road. Beggars and warblers scurried around. Merchants pushing carts and shops with signboards appeared constantly, and gorgeous carriages on the roads on both sides of the river also began to appear. From the wooden lattice window, it can be seen that sitting inside is a woman with a gorgeous dress and a gentleman with a walking stick in front of the 5th bridge corridor. The sampan stopped. Hagrid took out 24 copper plates from his arms and handed them to the boatman. Then everyone leaped onto the embankment and walked along the mossy stairs to the shore. Olaf only saw London in the 1730s for the first time when the soles of his feet stepped onto the firm and smooth stone road, the capital of the United Kingdom and the top 10 metropolis in Europe. The urban areas are all spacious streets paved with slabs. The streets are lined with green grass, flowers and trees, and even horse dung is being cleaned up. It can be seen that the prototype of the city in the core area of London has already been established. Is that tall palace the palace of the King of England? An Icelandic Viking pointed to the two-story stone and wooden buildings in the far southwest, and said in surprise Olaf and Hagrid also saw the distant palace complex for the first time. The palace has a height of a 4-story house. The whole is made of rock. The surface is painted with colorful paint, and there are various reliefs and patterns. The architecture that blends Baroque and Nordic styles is not as sacred and tall as the cathedral, but it is much more magnificent than the cathedral. That was the palace built during the time of James I. It is said that His Majesty Charles I has expanded it many times after taking over. It looks so magnificent. Hagrid gently shook his head and exclaimed. Olaf remembered that he and his uncle and brother had heard about this palace in Amsterdam the year before, so he smiled. I heard in Amsterdam that the Whitehall Palace is one of the best palaces in European countries. It's amazing. Our Hatterborgen Groad and the Governor Mansion in Reykjavik are not as good as this palace, and even one of them is not as good as this palace. Haha, you have to know that the palace is built with the power of the whole country. Our Wendland's income in the past few years has been invested in the construction of the palace, and I am afraid that we will not be able to build 1/10 of the Whitehall Palace. Hagrid is very aware of the country's will and the huge financial resources of the country, so you read www.uucan't'you.com and said with a chuckle Olaf was non-committal, but he snorted coldly in his heart. It seems that the famous Buckingham Palace in later generations has not been built, or is not well known, but this palace is really bigger than the later Buckingham Palace. It's a pity that there are royal guards around the palace, so I can see clearly if I can get closer, but what good is your palace? Olaf thought that 19 years later. Whitehall Palace is also called Westminster Palace and Whitehall Palace. King Charles I of the United Kingdom of England, Scotland, and Ireland, who lives in this magnificent palace, will be at the gate of the palace. I lost my head outside knowing that Olaf, who had destroyed the English robber kingship, could not help but raise the spirit of Aku in his heart, despising the dazzling Charles I. What kind of cow are you? Your Majesty the King whose head was chopped off. Thinking of Charles I's head, Olaf thought of Cromwell who chopped his head. Olaf thought that he was still very young now, and if he had a chance, he had to make a name for himself. He just lost his job because of Charles I's dissolution of Parliament. The Lord Protector who has returned to the manor's identity. Get acquainted. After all, burning a cold stove is what the Traverser should do. https://Genius remembers this site address in 1 second. Mobile version reading URL. Chapter 166, Whitehall Palace. Wandered through the streets of London for a while before the sky gradually dimmed. Olaf and Hagrid randomly found a bar and took 5 guards to find a free table to sit down, order 3 cheese pizzas, grilled fish, soybean rice and other staple foods, and finally ordered 7 glasses of dark beer. After a while, the food and beer were served. After everyone had a good meal, they listened to the Londoners in the bar for a while, and got up and left before night. There were originally 2 drunk ruffians in the bar who were always going to swindle money from outsiders, but when they saw Olaf and Hagrid, 2 strong giants with unknown and strong men, they became honest. On the night of the 17th century, there were only a few pubs on the streets of London with lights on, and most of the other shops were closed, and there were fewer and fewer people on the streets taking advantage of the darkness before he could see the surrounding scenery clearly. Olaf turned his head and glanced at the colorful brilliance that shot out from the latticed glass windows in the distance. He whispered that the King of England was extravagant and corrupt, and then he and Hagrid took care of the ship. The sampan will be in the port of West India. When Hagrid, Olaf and others returned to the ship, the 2 doctors were waiting for them with a sad expression on their faces. Seeing that the robes of the 2 middle-aged doctors were stained with bright red blood stains and colorful medicinal juice, they knew that they might have just treated the patients. Mr. Hagrid, your crew seems to have been ill at sea. We have given them a potion, enema and bloodletting. We have treated the leprosy patient with hot guano. At the beginning it is very effective, but just now their mental condition is getting worse and worse. What about this? Most of the sick are contracted white slaves. It does not matter if one of the native slaves died, but when the 4 contracted white slaves died, Hagrid and Olaf compensated their relatives a sum of money, and more importantly, the contracted white slaves were written. With land's scarce human resources, Hagrid did not want to let the patient die. Olaf frowned. He knew that the current traditional therapy in Europe was bloodletting, but how could bloodletting cure all diseases? But the problem was that Olaf did not understand what disease these sailors had. Even if he knew that he had no medicine, it was absolutely absolute. It can't be cured. Olaf was unprofessional and did not dare to question him, so he had to say, please continue the treatment. I don't know how the two doctors are going to treat the patients. We have already discussed that we will bleed 4 more patients with evil. This time we need to put 2 ounces and take them internally with goatee and spider eggs. It should be effective, the 2 doctors told Huo with a serious face. Raf made a funny joke. Olaf almost laughed. He waved his hand and said, no, you should use the simplest treatment method. The 2 doctors looked at each other, obviously wanting to continue to persuade Olaf. Hagrid had long known that Olaf opposed bloodletting therapy, etc. Although Hagrid did not trust these therapies very much, the problem was that apart from their professionalism, he could no longer find a doctor. After thinking about it, Hagrid also said, 2 doctors, please use the simplest method of treatment, then please prepare some wine. Add a little salt to them after heating it. It may be effective, but, this time, before the doctor was finished, Olaf hurriedly ordered the people behind him to take care of it. When Olaf got up the next morning, he learned the sad news that the 5 patients were still half dead in the room except the leprosy. The remaining 4 had been in a coma during the night, and the remaining 1 did not even have a high fever. Olaf and Hagrid had no way to deal with it. They could only order their sailors and guards not to touch the patient, lest there might be infection, and then it took an extra 20 shillings to ask the 2 doctors to continue treatment. After having a meal of diced potatoes and sweet potato mash, Olaf and Hagrid heard someone outside speak English in a standard London accent. When they heard Hagrid, they laughed. Business is here. Olaf swallowed the food in his mouth and heard clearly that it was a merchant who asked loudly outside the ship, as if he was about to buy fur. Hagrid, who has gone through more than 2 decades of ups and downs, and Olaf, who had been instructed by heir, are very clear that the fur, bone china, caramel syrup, water of life, etc., which are valuable in the fleet, cannot be fully exposed. After all, the essence that the ruler of any country in Europe is now a robber is undoubtedly exposed. In the European War the big guys became greedy. Hagrid, Olaf and others not only killed Wenlan, but also ruined Wenlan's 1-year accumulation of hard work. Therefore, they brought more than 300 elites who could become thugs and pirates on board at any time, but in order to avoid danger and trouble, when Hagrid was listed on the exchange, he only wrote that he had a small amount of fur, caramel, syrup and other valuables, and the most were wood, dried fish and wine. Through the registration of the exchange, everyone will only have a good impression of the fleet from Iceland, believing that the fleet has a certain voyage capability and strength, and possesses valuable commodities and a small amount of luxury goods. There are 5 or 6 berths in the West Indies port of London every week, so it is not very conspicuous if Hagrid lists on the exchange and says that the timber of the fleet is only for the eyes of people. The real goods are more than 200 pieces of porcelain, 1,200 barrels of high spirits that exceed whiskey, more than 6,000 pounds of caramel, and 2,000. A can of royal jelly, 100,000 pounds of dried fish, more than 6,000 pieces of rare fur. Even a fool who sees it knows that these dazzling, valuable commodities are worth more than 200,000 pounds of silver. Such a huge wealth, not to mention that officials and businessmen at all levels cannot restrain greed. Even Charles I of the Whitehall Palace also ordered to rob and seize when wealth is too great. No one talks about gentleness and ethics. They only believe in the weak and the strong. Therefore, Hagrid registered only 1/10 of the commodities on the London Stock Exchange. Even so, it caused a sensation in the noble circle of London merchants because Hager's fleet brought rare furs such as skins, white wolf skins, white bear skins, and black bear skins that are rare on the market, as well as porcelain and caramel from the Daming country in the Far East. Royal jelly, a popular sweet drink in the upper ranks. As for the spirits called the water of life, the British don't take it seriously. They just think it's a special kind of whiskey. Hagrid knows very well that every year his fleet in Amsterdam will cause dozens of large and small businessmen to take turns or bidding and buying sessions. He thought that a large group of British people would come this morning, but he waited until his men got outside. After the British businessmen brought in, Hagrid and Olaf were surprised to find that www.wooksyaspit.com there was only one middle-aged man wearing a wooling robe and a top hat. This man was dressed richly, with extraordinary temperament, but his face there was no arrogance of a nobleman, and 2 young entourage followed him. Hagrid guessed that he was not a big businessman with family support, but he was probably the white glove of a nobleman. While Olaf and Hagrid observed the middle-aged man walking into the cabin, the middle-aged man is also observing Hagrid and Olaf sitting at the wooden table. These two Icelanders can also see that they are majestic and tall. Sir Rock was under pressure in his heart. He believed that this was purely a natural reaction of a traditional English gentleman when he saw a barbaric Nordic giant bear deer Captain Hagrid. "This is Sir Rock, the manager of the Essex Fur Company. I heard that you have a lot of precious skins, so I came here to take a look." Sir Rock greeted Hagrid very politely, and at the same time expressed his own demands. Hagrid got up and shook hands with Sir Rock and asked him to sit down. "Thank you, Mr. Rock, for coming. Please sit down. Our furs are all from the deep forests of northern Europe and Siberia. They are trophies of blood and time exchanged by local hunters," Hagrid said impassionately, and finally talked about a tragic family he had seen in the dense Nordic forests. For Hunter, as if he had actually seen it with his own eyes. https://genius remembers this site address in 1 second, mobile version reading URL. Chapter 167, Essex Leather Company. If you tell a lot of lies, you will believe it. Hagrid puts the humorous rhetoric upright. This is completely practice makes perfect. Olaf secretly praised his uncle in his heart. Hagrid's fudge daffy would have a good effect on ordinary businessmen. Unfortunately, Sir Rock is also an old skater who has been trained in the mall. He looks like a gentleman, but in fact he is slick and treacherous like a bummer. "Yes, I believe in everything you say, Mr. Hagrid. Therefore, as long as the quality of skin is good, our company is willing to buy it at a high price. Sir, can you take a look at it?" Sir Rock has always been with Hagrid, and finally he politely requested to see the goods, and his performance was easy, and he was not affected by Hagrid's emotions at all. Olaf moved in his heart, knowing that he had met a mature businessman, so he gave his uncle a wink, indicating that it would not be necessary, and at the same time instructed the white slave sailor in the cabin to take some leather samples for Sir Rock to inspect. After a while, the sailor took a dozen complete furs and put them on the table. Hagrid waved his hand and then Sir Rock reached out to touch it, and then felt the silky touch, and finally smiled with satisfaction. "Very good. Mr. Hagrid, what price are you going to sell?" Hagrid pointed to the fur and said one by one. "Beaver skin is 22 pounds silver, skin is 17 pounds silver, black bear skin is 46 pounds silver, fox skin is 10 pounds silver, and white wolf skin is 13 pounds. One piece of skin costs 100 pounds. After hearing Hagrid's offer, Sir Rock shook his head again and again. After some bargaining between the two, they were finally held down by more than 20% of the price. The 200 skins, 10 black bear skins, 100 white wolf skins, 2 white bear skins, more than 100 squirrel skins and many other furs of the Hager News were bought by Crocker, and then the two of them drafted a contract. After the contract was drawn up, Sir Rock shook hands with Hagrid very happily, and said, "A total of 18,000 pounds of silver. I will wait for someone to send the money. The amount is huge, and it may not be collected at a time. You may have to waited. What will you be afraid of waiting?" Hagrid smiled. "Mr. Rock, why not have lunch on the boat?" "Thank you Mr. Hager for the invitation." After thanking him, Sir Rock continued to ask, "I heard that you still have porcelain brought from Dongfang Gaming on your ship. I wonder if you can take a look?" Hagrid glanced at Olaf. Olaf smiled and said, "Is Mr. Rock also interested in porcelain? Who wouldn't love fine porcelain?" Sir Rock laughed, and then explained, "The boss of our S6 company, Sir Bircher, wants to buy some good porcelain, so let me also take a look." "Oh? Your company boss turned out to be a noble knight, so you can definitely appreciate our porcelain." Olaf casually echoed a sentence, and then personally went to get a set of white porcelain tea sets. Bone china looks similar to white porcelain at first glance. There is absolutely no problem in fooling European laymen, so Olaf described this tea set as a Ming official kill. Sir Rock carefully touched it and looked at it, and finally said confidently, "Obviously this tea set is indeed from Eastern porcelain, but the shape does not seem to be similar to the previous Eastern porcelain. This is our specially customized porcelain in line with European style. And there are some similar ones." "That's really good." Rock reluctantly let go, and then asked cautiously, "How would you sell this tea set, Mr. Hagrid and this gentleman?" "My name is Olaf." "Mr. Sir Rock," Olaf introduced himself solemnly. "Okay, Mr. Olaf." Olaf didn't know the price of the porcelain market, so he said casually, "You can quote a price. After all, the porcelain market has always been very transparent." Seeing this young man kick the ball back, Rock smiled lightly and said, "According to my past experience, because the color of this tea set is too single, the price will not be too high. I think I can only give you one. The price is thousands of shillings. 1,000 shillings is more than 40 pounds of silver." Olaf raised his brows and shook his head and said, "This is impossible. We spent 1,500 shillings when we bought it at Ming. You know, it's not because there are crew members who need to recover from illness and you are going to go directly to Amsterdam. If you buy this porcelain from a Dutch merchant, you may cost 3,000 shillings or more." Rock looked at Olaf helplessly. He was convinced that this young man who looked at only 18 or 9 years old was a very mature businessman, so he could only bring up the spirit to bargain with him after a long time. 7 sets of tea sets and a dozen pairs of vases fired by Olaf Bone China Factory were selected by Rock and finally sold for 1,380 pounds of silver. Olaf had more than 200 porcelains in his hands, but the ones with the best appearance and the most valuable were picked by Rock, and he didn't like the rest, so he could only sell them to small merchants. One of his entourage also brought in 2 boxes of gold coins with his servant after buying porcelain. After checking that the coins were correct, the 2 parties shook hands and said goodbye, and then Hagrid brought the contract and 5,000 shillings to pay the tax, and he breathed a sigh of relief after obtaining a certificate. 7 or 8 merchants came one after another in the afternoon, but most of them were very limited. They only bought 500 pounds of royal jelly and 300 pounds of syrup. 200 barrels of wine were bought by a wine merchant. Royal jelly is sold at the same price as usual because of its unique flavor and characteristics of being eaten by the royal family, but the sugar and starch are not easy to sell. Olaf finally lowered the price by 30%. It was sold at the price of ordinary black sugar, and only a few merchants dared to try. They bought 300 pounds of maltose together, but did not pay attention to starch. Grain merchants, grocery merchants, and professional sugar merchants all dared to purchase Olaf's royal jelly and caramel, but because the wine merchant was a dominant one in London, 90% of the market was monopolized by several nobles such as the Earl of Warwick, so they bought. The wine merchant did not have the strength to eat too much. After tasting a sip of the water of life, he gritted his teeth and did not bargain, so he bought a barrel at the price of more than 30% of the whiskey quoted by Olaf. The fleet docked at London's West India Wharf for about 5 days. From noon on the second day, merchants from London and Scotland came to buy caramel, royal jelly and dried fish, etc. every day from morning to night, although the traffic was lively. All the total turnover of the day did not exceed 1,000 pounds of silver. However, due to the limited size of the city in London, the shipment volume is far less than that of Amsterdam. At the same time, because there are still 2 sick sailors who have not recovered their health, they can only sell them slowly for a few more days. After 5 days, 5 sick sailors died one after another and 3 were buried casually. A white slave sailor with the healthiest body gradually recovered. Another slave suffering from leprosy did not know whether he was strong or the 2 doctors' messy treatments worked. Anyway, it was the pimple erythema on his face and so on. The decline is obviously slowly recovering. The improvement in the overall health of the sailor made Hagrid and others relieved. Hagrid originally wanted to leave London and go to Amsterdam, but Olaf was worried that the 2 sailors would be sick again, so he insisted on waiting 2 more days. By the 6th day, in addition to small businessmen in England, some Danish, Norwegian, Dutch, and Baltic Sea merchants also came. The fleet at Pier 8 is selling porcelain, royal jelly, oriental caramel and spirits higher than whiskey. The news has spread to the London business circle. After several days of fermentation, the foreign businessmen who came this time are stronger than the local businessmen in London, so the purchase volume is 2 or 3 times more than before. After Hagrid and Olaf sold 300 cans of royal jelly, 1,600 pounds of caramel, 260 buckets of water for life, and 30,000 pounds of dried fish. www.wooksiaspit.com. Rock found the sea again. Jet and Olaf personally invited them to the day after tomorrow to attend a cocktail party at the Berkhill Manor in Chelmsford. This is the invitation of his big boss, the foremost businessman in the Chelmsford area, Sir James Berkhill. After many days of exchanges with British merchants in London, Olaf and Hagrid both learned that Essex is the largest leather company in London, which specializes in leather processing and production. The boss, Sir James Berkhill, is also known in London. The big merchant in Essex is the largest landlord and nobleman in Essex, and he is a middle-class figure in the Kingdom of England. Sir Berkhill invited the 2 to the reception, which made Hagrid and Olaf a little flattered, so they hesitated. Hagrid raised his vigilance in his heart. He knew that he and others had earned more than 30,000 pounds of silver these days, 80% of which attracted the attention of interested people. The United Kingdom is a country where pirate heroes are born. They are not concerned about the influence and worry about the fleet. Hundreds of armed guards, maybe some of them can't stand it. Although he was worried that Berkhill had ulterior motives, Hagrid was not afraid of things, and he was not polite. He looked at Sea Rock with a smile and asked in a low voice, "Thank you, Sir Berkhill, for the invitation. We must go, but Rock, sir, can you tell us why Sir invited us? https://genius remembers this site address in 1 second. Mobile version reading URL. Chapter 168, Sir Berkhill. Hagrid's question was very rude, and it could be said that it was tantamount to embarrassing the Sir Jas who invited him. After all, the social etiquette only involves invitation and participation. You cannot directly ask why the person invited himself. If you strictly care about it, this is a noble etiquette and contempt of demeanor. Sea Rock just frowned, contemptuous of the rude Icelanders in his heart, but on the surface he said coldly, "Mr. Hagrid, I can't answer your question, but as far as I know, Berkhill, sir, he likes the porcelain you sell, and Sir Stephen, who is a guest at Essex Manor, is also very interested." Sir Stephen, Olaf raised his eyebrows suddenly and asked in surprise, "Are you talking about Sir Carnarvon Stephen? The Lord Governor of Ireland?" "Yes, sir," Sea Rock shrugged slightly. "How has the Governor of Ireland returned to London?" Olaf looked at Hagrid, and Hagrid muttered, looking at Sea Rock's expression. He obviously knew something, but he didn't mean to tell Olaf the two. Knowing that Stephen was also a part of the reception, Olaf and Hagrid were relieved in their hearts. After all, they had been dealing with them for many years. The old aristocratic man, inviting himself to participate is mostly Stephen's meaning. Exactly half a month ago, Olaf also sold some fur, royal jelly, caramel, and water of life to the governor's mansion and Lord Bowles. Because it was a regular customer, Olaf also wiped out dozens of pounds of silver. A fraction got the verbal approval of the two bigwigs. "I didn't expect to see him in half a month." Governor Stephen went back to London, and I don't know if he was for business or private. Olaf made up his mind as soon as his thoughts turned, and then he said goodbye to Sea Rock with a smile, and then agreed with Hagrid to go to Essex Manor the day after tomorrow. Because of the day after tomorrow, Olaf and Hagrid also decided to wait until they returned from the reception to leave for Amsterdam during the week in West Indies port. Olaf did not take time off. In addition to dealing with businessmen everywhere, Olaf also inquired about all kinds of information about England and European countries, and summarized in his mind, in order to grasp the latest situation in Europe. And circumstances change. Now the Catholic League and the Protestant League are in a state where the war has ceased, and small battles continue. The 30 Years' War has basically been suspended since the signing of a contract between King Christian IV of Dan and the Emperor of Habs in April last year. At this time, the Holy Roman Empire had disbanded Wallenstein's team in order to save military expenses, while France and Britain were looking for new fighters or looking for a time that suits them. The changes in Europe seemed to become slow and monotonous. In May of 1630, Olaf was relieved after learning of the changes in the war between the Protestant and Catholic Confederates. He knew that things were still the same as the progress of the 30 Years' War in his memory. Denmark signed with the Holy Roman Emperor in May 1629. The Lubeck Peace Treaty was determined, and then the army of the Holy Roman Empire began to search for ports in the Baltic Sea and build warships. The tense and temporary peace lasted until July 1630. His Majesty the Lion of Sweden, with the support of French and British funds and even mercenaries, would cross the Baltic Sea and attack north of Germany and look southward until November 1632. In the Battle of Lutzen in May, King Gustav I, who commanded the Swedish army in succession towards the ever-victorious battle, was killed. The Swedish offensive began to turn into a defensive position. Then France personally ended. Denmark took advantage of the death of the Nordic Lion to attack Sweden, and then ferry. The British Allied forces fought with the Danish, Spanish, Dutch, and Holy Roman Empire forces until October 1648 and finally signed a peace treaty. The 30 Years' War finally ended with the victory of the Protestant alliance. Olaf knows very well that after another 2 months, Sweden, the powerful Nordic country, will send troops to the south, and then the name of Gustav I will be a big hit in Europe. While learning about European information, Olaf also paid attention to the London market. He spent more than 8,000 shillings to purchase several thousand sets of pickaxes, shovels and other mining tools, and at the same time asked where there are blast furnaces for sale. Although it has not entered the Industrial Revolution now, It is necessary to have high-quality iron ore if you want to become a power in Europe, and then you can forge high-quality guns, artillery and other weapons and equipment. At present, Europe has large-scale high-quality iron ore and has been mined and used in countries and regions such as Sweden, France, the United Kingdom, Germany, the Netherlands, etc. Especially the iron-making technology of the United Kingdom and the Netherlands and Sweden are world-class. Olaf also looked at it when he bought the pickaxe and found that the iron is indeed superior, so he prepared to buy an iron blast furnace in the UK without hesitating money. At the same time, he hired several blacksmiths to help Winland upgrade the iron ore production and refining steel. In the past few days, Olaf, Hagrid and others have also discovered a phenomenon, that is, a dozen ships in the West Indies port of London simultaneously recruited contracted white slaves and free men, and they want to collectively migrate to the New England area of the West Indies to colonize. Olaf made a special trip to see after discovering it, and found that this was a colonial activity of a Massachusetts Bay Company. They first commissioned a manor near Cambridge to recruit freedmen and contracted white slaves, and then they also carried out false propaganda on the wharf, saying that the New World had become there are great places of gold everywhere, and dozens of hundreds of people rushed to sign up every day, with a dream of getting rich overnight, and exchange all of their wealth for a ferry ticket. Olaf thought of Massachusetts in the later New England region, and then his heart was tight, knowing that the Virginia colony on the southeast coast has been established. This is the future of Virginia. Then the Massachusetts colony will be established this year. It's Massachusetts in the future, knowing that the British colonization of the New World is about to enter a period of large-scale population migration. From this year, there will be more than 100,000 British colonists on the east coast of North America in 10 or 20 years, and the Winland family dominates the situation. With the increase in the number of British people, it will soon break down. So we must expand as much as possible while the strength of the New England area is weak. Olaf's sense of urgency deepened as the contracted white slaves and freedmen of England continued to board the ship under the leadership of the manor master www.wooksiaspit.com. One after another, large ships flying the flag of the Massachusetts Bay Company left the port going to North America. The mood becomes more and more heavy. The situation in North America has changed with the increase in the number of British people, Olaf said, looking at his uncle. Hagrid clearly knows the many targeted actions by the English against New France, so he also knows that as New England's colonies and population increase, there will be conflicts and even wars between Vinland and New England in the future, so we must be vigilant, and even dealt with it in advance. Olaf, you said that the British guys will become more and more powerful in the future. How do we Winland get along with them? Do you send troops to control like Plymouth or maintain friendly business relations? Hagrid knew that as Winland got better and better, you can't just think about doing things, so I have a headache. So I asked Olaf. Olaf thought for a while, shook his head lightly, and said, we don't have to offend the British. The North American continent is very vast. We only need to continue to expand to the inside of the mainland and master more and more land, population, and resources. It can't threaten us. When our Winland territory has more and more people, we can send someone to occupy New England at any time. https://Genius remembers this site address in 1 second. Mobile version reading URL. Chapter 169, Mr. Cromwell, hello. European aristocrats, wealthy businessmen and other groups and classes merge and use each other, so there are a lot of cocktail parties and banquets used for communication. It can be said that in any European country or city, large and small cocktail parties are held every day. A considerable part of the income of the royal family and nobles will be invested in activities such as cocktail parties, which is a tradition and a habit. It was the day when Sir Berkhill was holding a reception. Olaf and Hagrid got up early and changed into a clean woolen gown after washing. This was made by Olaf at the tailor shop on Elizabeth Street the day before yesterday. Come back. Hagrid and Olaf's clothes cost 800 shillings of gold coins. According to the normal specifications, the lower body also wears silk stockings shipped from the Far East, which will make their legs look clean and beautiful. But Olaf was very resistant to wearing silk stockings. In the end, Hagrid also gave up the custom-made stockings. The two uncles and nephew ordered 2 ordinary trousers, tied the trousers well and stuffed them into the riding boots, which looked capable and good-looking and not rude. Olaf and Hagrid checked each other and found that the clothes and hair were all clean and tidy, so they went to the countryside and sprayed the unusually expensive perfume that they bought together before custom-made clothes, and then they disembarked with 10 Viking escorts. Port a guard in a cart near the port brought out the 12 tall and healthy horses Hagrid bought yesterday, and then the group rode a BMW horse and drove along the path to the north of Essex County. Essex County is approximately 30 miles northeast of London. Olaf and his team rushed on horseback and arrived at the county town near noon. They saw the low and dilapidated ancient city wall and all kinds of housing. After inquiring about Sir Berkhild's manor, Olaf and Hagrid found a large manor in front of a forest in the northern part of the county town. At this time, a dozen ornate carriages had been parked in the open space in front of the manor. Several servants are waiting. "Hello, sir," a young servant greeted him and bowed a salute, and then asked, "I wonder if you are here for the reception. My master and master are Hagrid and Olaf, merchants from Iceland, and it was Sir Berkhild who invited my master and master to come." An Icelander stepped forward to negotiate in English, and the servant hurriedly bowed and said, "Then please come in, Master Hagrid and Master Olaf. The reception will begin at 12 noon. After Hagrid and Olaf dismounted, they would take 10 guards into the manor, but the servant stopped the people again and asked them to take off their swords and let them keep them. Hagrid waved his hand without hesitation and waited for the weapon. The servants handed over to the manor walked into the manor from the main entrance, into the back garden and the hall connecting the garden. At this time, the hall and garden are already full of long tables. On the table are cakes, sausages, bacon, marinated fish, pudding and other food. There are also several servants holding red wine bottles and whiskey bottles pouring into the glasses. There were already many men and women wearing gorgeous costumes, talking in groups. Olaf, Hagrid and the guards' tall bodies immediately attracted the attention of most people when they appeared in the venue. Olaf whispered, "Batch, you guys. Let's go and eat something." The guards glanced at Hagrid, nodded when he saw that he hadn't changed. Olaf and Hagrid didn't care about the eyes of the people around them. They found something to eat first. After a while an elderly servant appeared in front of the two of them, bowed and said in Latin, "Mr. Hagrid, Mr. Olaf, my sir invites you to come and speak." Hagrid was confused, but Olaf had already replied in Latin with some Icelandic accent, "Please lead the way." When the old servant led the two into the hall, Olaf whispered to his uncle, "Sir Bircher invites us in." "Okay," Hagrid said with a light cough, "my Latin is not good. You can handle it if they pull text later." Olaf nodded. Just about to speak, he saw a round table in the hall full of food and various wines. As soon as he approached Olaf, he smelled the scent of the water of life, and then 6 people were sitting behind the table. 4 men with different ages and temperaments and dresses. 2 men still seemed to wear wigs from their hairstyles. The 6 people were talking quietly, and they stopped talking when Hagrid and Olaf approached, and at the same time they smiled and looked over. Olaf and Hagrid also smiled at several people, then stood in front of an old man, bowed and said, "His Excellency, Lord Stephen, I am glad to see you again." This old man with tendrils and woolen fur is the governor of Ireland, Carnarvon Stephen. He nodded slightly, then pointed to the two and said to the people around him, "Earl Ellen Page and Count New Frank, Borch Sir William and Hampton and Little Cromwell. These 2 handsome tall men are the descendants of the Icelandic nobleman Hagrid and his nephew, a very smart and mature child Olaf, who I said before. I provide high-quality skins and royal jelly." Several nobles of different ages nodded, and then smiled at Hagrid and Olaf, and then an elderly person of the same age as Stephen stood up and said, "Welcome to Mr. Hagrid and Mr. Olaf to join me." Reception. "My son James Berkhill, this is the son-in-law of the Dutch Prince of Orange, the Earl of New Frank. This is Alan, the Earl of Warwick, and this is my son-in-law Mr. Cromwell. This is Jan Putin. He used to be a counselor, but now he is a pure businessman." Berkhill's playful words made the young Earl of New Frank and the others laugh, and Hampton also shook his head. From their words, you can tell that Charles I's dissolution of Parliament and the dictatorship of Charles I the previous year were very common. Disgusted, Hagrid and Olaf paid a few honorable guests very well, but Olaf was very interested in the young man named Cromwell, and looked more at this long-faced curly-haired man. www.oopsias.com. This several nobles have seen the porcelain, water of life, caramel, royal jelly, fur and other items bought by Sir Berkhill from Hagrid and Olaf. They are also very interested, so they agreed with Hagrid on their respective needs. Because Hagrid had previously reported a limited number of commodities, he dared not agree on the spot, and could only say that he would mobilize another batch of commodities next month. Soon several noble lords and representatives of merchants negotiated with Hagrid and Olaf on a large business of £100,000 of silver at the reception, and agreed on the delivery date of June. After talking about the voice, Stephen told the two that they could leave. And then Olaf and Hagrid consciously pushed out of the circle and ate something on the peripheral table. After a long time, With the appearance of musicians and dancers, graceful dancing and beautiful music appeared at the reception. The participants all stopped to watch. Olaf glanced at the table and found that Governor Stephen and the two most distinguished earls had disappeared. It seemed that they had gone to rest elsewhere, while the host of the reception, Birkir, was holding a young girl in his arms. Dancing on the dance floor, Hampton and Cromwell drank whiskey not far away. Olaf's heart moved quickly and walked over Mr. Cromwell. Hello. Standing in front of Cromwell, who was about the same height as him but more than 10 years older than him, Olaf smiled and greeted him. https://genius remembers this site address in 1 second. Mobile version reading URL. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 170, Become Friends with the Future Lord Protector. Mr. Cromwell, hello. Hearing someone talking to himself in Latin, Cromwell felt that his voice was young and familiar. He turned his head and found that it was Olaf, a young businessman from a fallen aristocratic family in Iceland. Cromwell's tittering and his qualities made him not underestimate the young man in front of him from a foreign country. After shook hands with Olaf, Cromwell smiled and said, "Hello. Mr. Olaf, you look very young, maybe nearly 10 years younger than me, but you have already gone out to do business on behalf of your family. It's really admirable." Olaf did not directly answer Cromwell's temptation about his age, because there is no way to answer this question. I can't say that Olaf is only 13 years old this year. Although Olaf's biological age is only a little more than 13 years old, his height and body shape surpass that of ordinary English people, and he has grown a hairy, light-colored golden beard. With his language, behavior and mental maturity, he just looks at it like a Northern European youth in his 20s, and his clothes are more mature today. Cromwell regards Olaf as a young man in his 20s. Olaf clearly saw this, and naturally wouldn't tell the truth to make people look down on it. After all, it is difficult for a minor to get the attention of others, but a young and promising youth is different. After chatting for a few words, Olaf asked curiously, "My cousin is a member of the Williams family in Edinburgh, Scotland. He once said that his family is the same as that of Thomas Clint from the United Kingdom decades ago. Prime Minister Will has relatives. He said that there is only one Cromwell family in Britain, so are you the younger of that Prime Minister?" Cromwell chuckled, nodded very elegantly, and said, "If your brother-in-law is a member of the Williams family, then my great-grandfather is in the same family. My great-grandfather Chad Williams inherited all of Thomas' legacy has also been passed on to Cromwell's family." "Then you are Olaf Cromwell from Huntington?" Olaf asked with piercing eyes. Cromwell said in surprise, "Have you heard of me?" "Haha, Huntington is just a small place," said and added, "Actually, my family is neither distinguished nor inferior. It is an ordinary squire family, but my great-grandfather, grandfather and uncle are indeed amazing people." Olaf had already determined that the brown-haired, blue-eyed man in front of him was Cromwell, the protector of the country who was famous in Europe in the future, and had cut off Charles I's head, so he stared at Cromwell's right eyebrow. A mole on the bone, smiled and said, "Your honorable name, Sir Oliver Cromwell, I have heard from people in Huntington. When you were a member of the House of Representatives the year before, you were not afraid of power and you were very admirable." "So I am. You are very fond of it." Cromwell laughed and said, "Thank you very much. I also feel that your conversation is not like an Icelander. It seems that it is really what Lord Stephen said, your family has a long history." The reception soon ended. It was not until the end that Olaf and Hagrid met with Governor Stephen, Sir Bolger and others to say goodbye. After returning to the dock, Hagrid took 14 ships to Amsterdam, preparing to sell some of the goods. Then take the remaining goods back to London and send them to the houses of a few noble merchants at the reception. Olaf deliberately befriended Cromwell at the reception, so the two had a very happy conversation and have become friends. At the end of the reception, Cromwell invited Olaf to visit his manor in Huntington. Olaf decided to stay in London after discussing with Hagrid, so he accepted the invitation with pleasure. Before Hagrid left, Olaf asked him to buy enough cotton seeds and other crop seeds, livestock, weapons, etc. in Amsterdam. The remaining linen, food, technicians, and white slaves could be purchased in London. Hagrid left an armed merchant ship and 30 guards and left with a fleet. Olaf stayed on the boat for a day before being invited away by Cromwell's servant. Olaf left and told the sailors to look after the ship, and then took his 4 guard servants and rode to Huntingdonshire in northwest London. It was already in the afternoon when he walked into Cromwell's manor. After Olaf got off his horse, he saw Cromwell personally come out to greet him. Handsome boy. This boy looks a bit similar to his father Cromwell, but the most like the mother of the child. The daughter of Sir Bulchil. Olaf and Cromwell's family were taken to the living room to sit down after the ceremony. After a few words, Olaf looked at his son next to him, and then Cromwell pointed at the sarcoma and eyebrows on his lower lip. Bone Mole said, "This child is not like me, he looks more like his mother, very handsome, and his face is clean." Olaf knew that Cromwell was an extremely powerful person, so he was calm about the defects in his facial features and appearance. This very ordinary performance made Olaf even more deeply impressed by the future protector of the country. "Child, what's your name?" Olaf took out a piece of caramel wrapped in paper from his arms with a smile, and handed it to the boy. "My name is Charlie Cromwell, uncle." Charlie, who was only 4 years old, showed calmness and proficiency. After answering Olaf's question, he thanked him politely and took it after observing his parents' eyes. "Caramel Charlie is such a lovable child," Olaf exclaimed, and then praised Cromwell's wife, Mrs. Elizabeth. "Your education for your child is really commendable." Seeing Elizabeth Bircher, who is less than 30 years old, has great charm and good makeup, she nodded unsmilingly in accordance with traditional etiquette, and said in a very relaxed and cheerful tone. Cromwell said when he came back, "I met a good friend who is knowledgeable and caring about politics and people's livelihood." "I didn't expect you to look so young, Olaf." Olaf already knew that Cromwell was 31 years old, a full 18 years older than himself, but telling the truth about this would scare them and would not do him any good, so Olaf could only lie. "I only followed my father since I was a child. They traveled all over the world and gained a lot of experience. In fact, I am less than 20 years old this year. After communicating with Mr. Cromwell the day before yesterday, I found that he deserves to be the top. Students at Cambridge University have unique insights into a lot of knowledge. I really want to ask for his advice." Haha, no one likes to listen to good things. Olaf's deliberate flattery and closeness, plus he really knows a lot of messy miscellaneous studies, and at the same time has an understanding of the world situation, and communicates with Cromwell, is not at all disadvantaged. It didn't take long for the two of them to feel more and more sympathetic to each other. www.wooksyaspit.com. Cromwell even felt that Olaf's judgment on the situation of the European war was surprisingly consistent with his own, because both believed that Denmark was defeated. After coming, Sweden, which has been vying with Denmark for dominance in Northern Europe, will be unable to restrain it. Moreover, Sweden's current monarch, Gustav II, has a reputation for being able to conquer wars. Even if Britain and France will not support Swedish financial supplies, I believe Gustav II will not allow the Austrian army to expand the sphere of influence in the Baltic Sea. South Bank. Therefore, it is inevitable that Gustav II will make a move. Cromwell is not the great dictator and the protector of Britain 10 years later. At best, Cromwell is just a squire with some land and wealth. He was a member of Parliament for a few months the year before, but he didn't. When he displayed his ambitions, His Majesty Charles I ordered the dissolution of the Parliament and returned to the country to sit up and set up with the landlord. In the past 2 years, Cromwell has been able to live well by relying on his uncle's inheritance and following his father-in-law and family relatives to do a little business. He has a good financial foundation, and at the same time, he is also keen on the affairs of his hometown and county. A gentleman outside the country, no matter who it is, including Cromwell himself, it is now impossible to imagine that he will become the master of the Kingdom of England in more than 10 years except Olaf. https://genius remembers this site address in 1 second. Mobile version reading URL. Chapter 171, talking about the past, the present, and the hero. The living room of Cromwell Manor was quiet. Olaf and Cromwell sat opposite each other on the sofa, each holding a cup of coffee with white smoke. It is noon. After breakfast, Olaf and Cromwell discussed the trend of the European war and the major impact of the future Protestant Union or Catholic Union victory or defeat on the overall situation in Europe and the situation in England. Although Cromwell is far away from the rivers and lakes, he has a high heart for the temple. In order to form a model of Fenjon as soon as he shoots, and then continue to win battles, this shows that he is a genius in strategy and tactics, and he has learned from ancient and modern battles. Especially it was the fighting situation in the 30 Years' War that he paid close attention to. Now it can be said that everyone's success has accumulated many days and nights before success. Temporary success can be a fluke, But long-term successes definitely strengthen Cromwell's views and opinions have a special sensitivity. If Olaf hadn't clearly understood the results of the 30 Years' War, it would be difficult to come up with meaningful ideas when discussing with Cromwell. However, because Olaf knew the ins and outs of the 30 Years' War, Cromwell had to pay attention to his opinions and ideas based on the retrogression of the consequences. In the 3 days Olaf came to Cromwell Manor, the two had discussed about 2.5 days, from Nordic culture, the failure of Christian IV of Denmark, and the colonization of the East Indies by Britain and the Netherlands. The two exchanged a lot of opinions. Olaf was sober and understood how the European elites at Cromwell's level had views on the many major events that occurred in the contemporary era. In this way, Olaf had a deep understanding of the times. A clearer understanding, and Olaf is backed by historical materials that he has seen in his previous life, and many of his opinions are novel and profound, which makes Cromwell think about it for a while every time he listens, but some he doesn't approve it, and some clap his hands in applause. I heard that Christian IV rarely showed up after the defeat. Now the Danish economy is ruined, and Jutland is full of homeless victims. The Danish parliament and ministers are worried about restoring people's livelihood. I heard from my father-in-law. Last month, Christian IV came to London as a guest and wanted to borrow money from His Majesty Charles I to solve the dilemma in Denmark. In order to increase his income, he even increased the shipping tax in the Song Strait and Iceland's tax by 30%. It is said that the price of goods in the Baltic Sea has soared. People also complained. It seems that it will take a long time for Denmark to regain strength this time. While speaking, Cromwell suddenly remembered a rumor, so he said, "You come from Iceland. I don't know if this rumor is correct." Olaf thought quietly about the various messages in Cromwell's words, and then shook his head. "The governor of Iceland has been forcing us to pay war contributions since 1627. To be honest, the Icelanders have long been squeezed. Many times people always sympathize with a tragedy far away from themselves, and turn a blind eye to the tragedies of those around them. Because of the misleading of an inertial thinking, Britain's oppression of the Irish has existed for hundreds of years." But Cromwell sympathized with the Icelanders after listening to Olaf's words. He suggested, from his personal judgment on the political situation and the perspective of future revolutionaries, "Just like us, as I said yesterday, if Gustav I leads the Swedish army to defeat the Holy Roman Empire's army, then Denmark will become a vassal of Sweden. So in the future, Denmark's power will become weaker and weaker, and Iceland may be able to seek more right." Olaf nodded and whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Cromwell, for your concern. We will fight for it." Because they were foreigners, Olaf and Hagrid had never known that King Christian IV of Dan had been a guest at the Whitehall Palace for more than a month, and they still wanted to borrow money from King Charles I of England. This matter is about Olaf was very concerned about the speed of Denmark's recovery, so he asked for details. King Dan's visit was a big news to the honorable gentleman of England. Cromwell was also very aware of the details. He thought about it and said, "His Majesty Christian IV's request has not been responded to. His Majesty Charles the year before, the Parliament was disbanded, and the support for the Netherlands and the French attack on Spain was stopped. He did not have a parliament, and it would not be easy to collect taxes. Charlie is also suffering from financial problems. How could he have failed to lend because of a little blood relationship? The Danish loan of the person, so Christian IV's loan failed." Olaf raised his eyebrows and said with a sneer at the corners of his mouth. Cromwell waved his hand and said, "It's almost there. Charlie entertains King Dan and his son and his companions in the Whitehall Palace every day. The food costs are very rich and luxurious, but that is to say, there is no money for loans. It is said that King Dan has posted twice in private. 4 days ago, the intention to leave was stated, and I think they will return to Copenhagen in the next few days." Cromwell was not surprised by Olaf's tone, because he also disliked the mischievous Charles I. This resonance is also part of the cornerstone of the relationship between the two. Olaf sneered in his heart and thought, Denmark can get a loan, and it will take at least 5 or 6 years to help the people in the military disaster and to make up for the trauma of the war. This year, as long as Sweden takes a powerful shot, Christian IV will have trouble sleeping and eating. At that time, we took advantage of Denmark's vitality to turn to Sweden. With the backing of the Nordic lion, Gueri, we can give Iceland the best chance to seek independence. After several days of discussions with Cromwell, combined with the original memory, Olaf has a more systematic understanding of the European war. Olaf also has a more mature idea about occupying Iceland to gain independence. Olaf combined with the future situation of the European war and understood that before the death of Gustav I in 1632, Sweden was the leader of the Protestant Union and the most powerful man on the European continent. When he was alive, Christian IV and both the Russian ruling patriarch and the Tsar, father and son, must act honestly and be good neighbors obediently according to various sources of information. Since signing a contract with Denmark last year, Wallenstein, the first soldier of the Holy Roman Empire, has gradually lost the emperor's favor. Olaf knew very well that this third jewel in the crown would be deposed by Emperor Ferdinand II of Habsburg this year, and hurried back to the fief to become a rich man, until the imperial commander-in-chief, Earl Tilly, 2 years later. After being killed by Gustav II, Wallenstein was reactivated, and then two heroes with Gustav II Wallenstein, who became the supreme commander of the Holy Roman Empire again, has been in the stalemate between the electorate of Saxe and Gustav II for nearly half a year, and finally fought in Lutzen. As a result, Gustav II died in the battle. Stan was defeated, and then Sweden's triumphant southward offensive was curbed. www.uxiaspet.com. But Wallenstein, who was in power, also gave birth to the idea of preserving its strength and making private peace talks with Sweden, plus conscripting soldiers and looting in the German Union countries. The many evil deeds made the states of northern Germany continue to demand that the emperor sanction him. In the end, under the acquiescence and even instructions of Ferdinand II, the famous Wallenstein was assassinated in the second year after the death of Gustav II. Died through the performance of the dispute between Gustav II and Wallenstein. Olaf is quite sure that the overall strength of Sweden's recruited and trained domestic professional soldiers through his improved battle formation and tactical arrangements is a bit ahead of Wallenstein. However, Wallenstein's army also has the current top combat power in Europe, plus the number of advantages. When it came back, it organized 70,000 troops, but the army led by the King of Sweden initially only had more than 4,000 men, and later it was less than 20,000 before the decisive battle. Completely the first enemy of Gustav II. Facts have proved that Gustav II died in the war with Wallenstein. After all, Olaf can be sure that if Finland soldiers participate in the war as Protestant mercenaries, they will be returned to Gustav II in exchange for the support of the ambitious Gustav II, but the strength will also be limited. However, when Gustav II and Wallenstein's army stalemate in 1632, as long as there is more strength to tilt a victorious Liber towards him, Gustav II will be willing to give more promises and support. Therefore, Olaf decided to persuade his father and uncle to join the Protestant Union in the name and identity of the independent division of Iceland at a critical moment in 1632, and became close comrades in arms with Sweden, helping Sweden to repel or even defeat the German army led by Wallenstein. From the diplomatic, military and other aspects, you can have the support of Sweden. Leading the people of Iceland to independence is not a delusion. Chapter 172, Blast Furnace and White Slaves. Olaf lived in Cromwell's manor for a whole week, during which time the two of them had a good chat. Although Cromwell has not yet had the opportunity to come to power, nor has he experience in commanding troops and governing the country, many of his political propositions, such as granting independence to the church, do not belong to each other as complete religious institutions, and the government must be formed. The reform of the parliament and the suppression of the elders who control the country's political power and religious rights have now come to a firm understanding. Olaf, who knows Cromwell's future achievements, is very clear that what Cromwell is talking about now is what he will do in the future, but he has done some things, and some things have been exploring during his lifetime. Olaf knew that Cromwell was a member of the Puritan independent faction, and that he would also be the chairman of the Council of State for the formation of the English Republic in the future. He was regarded as the standard-bearer of the bourgeois rebranding camp. Therefore, the radical views on politics are essentially defending the middle class, and the camp of the new bourgeoisie suppressed the old aristocracy and completely ignored the general public, but this is the limitation of the current era. If a thorough revolution is to be done now, the result will definitely be a failure. Olaf has not been able to recognize the world well before, because he was too young and did not understand 17th century Europe. Therefore, in the primitive society of Vinland, he could still offer advice and help, but he had no idea about the options and ideas for entering Europe in the future. Not clear through a week of exchanges with Cromwell, Olaf is more inclined to look at Europe in the 17th century, according to Cromwell's level of thinking. Because of the opening of the era of great navigation, the emerging gentlemen, big businessmen and other assets of Europe in the past 100 years, the number of classes has expanded rapidly, and the countries have not carried out reforms, given the new bourgeoisie corresponding social status, and even blindly seized and used military force. This has made the contradictions between the vested interest groups represented by the royal family and the nobility and the new bourgeoisie become deeper and deeper. In recent years, many disputes between Protestant and Catholic churches have erupted, but the problem has not been solved at all. Olaf is soberly aware that he must clarify the demands of the new bourgeoisie in his next intervention in European affairs. If he can lead these people to revolutionize, overthrow the old dynasty and establish a new country where the gentry, the rich, the merchants and the nobles share the power, all countries will probably be in chaos. Up after that, not to mention Iceland's independence, even if it becomes the master of Europa, there is a great possibility. In addition to his admiration for Cromwell's erudite and political vision, Olaf admired his generosity and enthusiasm. When he learned that Olaf was leaving, Cromwell gave Olaf a half mark. As a gift, Olaf also invited Olaf to come as a guest next time he comes to London. After a week of getting along, Cromwell's affection for Olaf doubled. He liked this young man who is not arrogant and not pushy in his heart. This handsome young man with blonde hair and blue eyes and golden beard speaks nicely, is warm and kind, and reveals in his speech. Cromwell is sure that this young man has the potential to become a big man, with a strong and heroic spirit that is not afraid of danger and difficulty. And not only Cromwell likes Olaf, his wife Elizabeth and his son Charlie both like Olaf, because Olaf always tells mother and son some weird but fascinating fantasy stories, such as a man named Harry, the story of Potter's magician. Olaf, you haven't finished telling me the Harry Potter story. I want to know when he can avenge his parents. That Dark Lord is damned. When Olaf was about to leave, Charlie hugged his dear uncle Olaf and was reluctant to let go, insisting that he tell another story. Olaf chuckled, glanced at his beautiful sister-in-law, and smiled. I'll tell you next time, little Charlie. You have to understand that Harry Potter is going to school too. I can only wait for him to leave me, in order to know his later experience, and then I will tell you. Do you think so? Charlie Cromwell, who was only 4 years old, was instantly crippled and nodded with flashing eyes. Yes. Yes. Uncle Olaf, you must tell me next time Harry Potter has defeated the devil. Okay, don't worry. I will make a special trip to Harry Potter to ask you clearly, and I will tell you next time. Olaf patted Charlie on the head, and then handed the child to Elizabeth. In the reluctant farewell of the Cromwell family of 3, Olaf left the manor on horseback with his servants and escorts, and rushed back to the ship in West India port. After learning that everything on board was normal, Olaf took 2 guards to the exchange and bought some hydraulic hammer tools. In the afternoon, a servant of Cromwell took a businessman and found Olaf. Olaf had previously helped Cromwell to buy some iron-making blast furnaces, and at the same time told Cromwell to start a contractual white slave business and planned to recruit a group of young white slaves in England. At this time, the business of the English colonization in Scotland is about to flourish. This year, the Massachusetts Bay Company has organized the first batch of manor and contract white slaves to establish a colony in New England. At the same time, the entire company is also planning to lead all personnel and funds to relocate to New England. Go to England and expect to build a colony with all its strength. The new Scottish island southwest of Vinland also began to have Scottish colonial companies gradually immigrating, but due to the lack of funding conditions, New Scotland could not develop at all. Olaf's half-month in London feels very fulfilling and comfortable. Only when he has a wealth of materials and is exposed to civilized music, costumes, wars, current affairs and other news in the center of the world. Reading www.uucan'tchoo.com. Olaf feels life is meaningful. Compared with Wenland's monotonous life, returning to Europe seems to be something to be done sooner or later. This is a must for returning to the civilized world. Olaf not only purchased various tools for mining and sieving, but also some linen and daily necessities. At the same time, the colonial companies of Britain, France, and the Netherlands made the changes to the colonization of the New World, which made Olaf feel it necessary to return to the text. Landau suggested that his father adjust the way of communicating with New England in the future. The British colonization of the New World will continue to intensify, so Vinland will accelerate the pace of erosion of the mainland and at the same time increase the control of New England. 5 days ago, while chatting with Cromwell, Olaf asked him to help buy some iron-making blast furnaces and other equipment, and he wanted to recruit a group of contracted white slaves. Cromwell already knew that Olaf's family had also established a colonial stronghold in the New World, so he readily agreed to the request and sent servants to ask his family's cousins, and father-in-law to help. Now there are servants to take. When the merchant came to Olaf, it was obvious that the matter was done. Islanden, you are here, what's the matter? Olaf asked after asking the two into the cabin, Mr. Olaf, Cromwell's servant Illidan was very aware of Olaf's position in the eyes of his master, so he bowed politely and introduced, "My master asked me to bring this gentleman to you. This gentleman is from Oxfordshire. The person in charge of the largest iron smelting plant. He's going to reopen a plant in Scotland and therefore needs to deal with equipment. Hearing that you are going to buy a blast furnace, he brought him here." Olaf looked at the black curly-haired man in a leather jacket, smiled and shook hands with him, and said, "Okay, let's talk about business." Chapter 173, Back to Woodland to engage in industry. Pay attention to the public account, book friends base camp, pay cash and coins when you follow. After a round of bargaining, Olaf paid £1,000 of silver, and then purchased some parts of 2 large iron-making furnaces. At the same time, he also obtained a blueprint for the construction of the iron-making blast furnace and 2 skilled workers. After bidding farewell to the merchant who left with a contract and money box, Olaf remembered the recruitment of contract white slaves, so he looked at Illidan and asked, "Dan, thank you and your master." Illidan was a gray-haired man in his 30s. He was also Cromwell's childhood playmate. He bowed when he heard Olaf's thanks and said, "Mr. Olaf, you are very polite. You and my master are good friends, sir. He also told me to do it for you. These are all within my responsibilities." "Thank you too," Olaf said in order to take more than 10 skins, took out 2 to Illidan, and then pointed to the rest and said, "Brother Cromwell, take these back." Enough little Charlie and Elizabeth's sister-in-law to make 2 beautiful leather jackets. Illidan did not refuse. He naturally put away the leather, then wrapped it in linen, and smiled. "I will tell the master when I go back next time. Your friendship with him is really deep." Olaf nodded and asked, "I don't know if there is any progress on the contract white slaves. Sir Berkhild's relationship and approach are very broad, and the lords of Cromwell's family are also big people. Now they have sent people to help you recruit. It is estimated that there will be a result tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. I will do this. Go and ask." "Don't worry," Illidan said softly and intimately looking at Illidan in front of him. Olaf couldn't help but miss the days when Pakiku was around. Although Pakiku did not have a culture of Illidan, he was loyal to himself and worked hard. In fact, he could help himself a lot. "I don't know how Pakiku is doing now. Can Greenland conquer uniformly this year?" After waiting for 2 days, Illidan came to visit again and told Olaf that he could take someone to board the ship tomorrow morning because the wharf left an armed merchant ship and another Thor's hammer. It can carry more than 300 people in total, but Hagrid's fleet will come back some time later. So Olaf's question about recruiting white slaves no limit. A total of 421 people were recruited, most of them were adult men, and the rest were part of families. Olaf nodded after hearing this, and then asked someone to withdraw some money to Illidan, and said, "I will ask someone to go with you to help the husband's house, thank you. And ask Mr. Dan to lead the way." Illidan rejected Olaf's gratitude this time, and then smiled. "You want to thank Sir Bolcher and the others, you need me to lead the way. This lazy person is absolutely willing to serve, but money is absolutely unacceptable to me. This is not in line with a servant. Professional ethics." "Sir," seeing Illidan's firm attitude, Olaf stopped insisting. Instead, he asked people to take half a pound of caramel, and smiled. "This is a dessert for your children and your wife. It's not worth any money. Please accept it." Illidan refused but could only accept, and then smiled bitterly. "Sir, your enthusiasm in dealing with others are really admirable." Olaf smiled slightly, and then sent someone to follow Illidan to give gifts to Sir Bolcher and other people who helped recruit white slaves. Sir Bolcher and others helped completely because of Cromwell's request. It can be said that it has nothing to do with Olaf. The owed favor is also the favor owed by Olaf to Cromwell, and Cromwell owes others favor, but Olaf still wants to maintain a close and comfortable friendship with Cromwell, and naturally wants to give favor to Cromwell, so he does not spare money in fur, caramel, spirits and other items left on board. Let people send it from house to house to express gratitude. After the round of gifts were given, Olaf had a good impression in the eyes of many nobles and big businessmen, and he was barely connected. If you want to talk about business in the future, you will not lose contact at the same time. It also helped Cromwell to increase his reputation. After all, the existence of a friend who can be so good at doing things and don't hesitate to save money has added points to Cromwell. Olaf received 300 contract white slaves the next morning, and then left the 2 basically healed sailors for them to give Hagrid a message and wait. That night, they left London with the people in the 2 boats and the corresponding supplies and money. The captains of the 2 ships sailing out of the Thames, under Olaf's order, turned their bows and headed south. ready to cross the Atlantic directly westward from the English Channel to Vinland. Before leaving, Olaf also bought dozens of pounds of cotton seeds in London, as well as hundreds of pounds of turnip seeds, peppers and other vegetable seeds. At the same time, he also bought many scientific books through Cromwell, such as The Nature of Ore, on high thermal technology, on metal and other books, are to systematically improve the development of wetland mining and iron smelting industry. Originally, Olaf wanted to wait for Hagrid to return, and then return to Wetland together, but after learning that the Massachusetts Bay Company was ready to relocate to New England for development and had organized a team of nearly 1,000 people, Olaf knew that he had to go back early and deploy the countermeasures against New England early. So Olaf didn't wait for Hagrid to return, so he arranged for the 2 sailors who had survived the illness to live in West Indies and wait for Hagrid. And then he personally left London in advance with the white slaves and the purchased goods and equipment, which eventually took time for more than 10 days. He returned to Wetland without any surprises and dangers. It was May 28 when Olaf returned to Port Grote. The weather in Wetland is colder than that in London. It is already summer but still wears robes. However, the enthusiasm of Hader, Katrina, Half, Gurney, and other family members makes Olaf not cool at all. Olaf first handed over 300 contracted white slaves to Heine for arrangement, and then ordered the slaves to remove the hydraulic forging facilities, iron plates, pickaxes, shovel and even some weapons and rifles from the ship and transport them to Hader Fort. Temporarily stored. It was the next night that Olaf was in the mood to have a sumptuous dinner with his family, and at the same time, he reported on his experience and sales in Ireland and London. The emphasis was on English people sales. The problem of the Massachusetts Gulf Company's vigorous immigration to New England and the changes in the progress of the European War. After hearing this, Hader, Heine and others fell into deep thought, and then Olaf said, I also brought back the drawings, parts, iron plates, etc. of the iron craftsman and the construction of the blast furnace, as well as the hydraulic equipment for ore processing. I think the focus of our internal development in Wetland this year is not only agriculture, hunting, and fishery, but also the development of mining and iron making. You speak slowly. There is too much information at this time. I have to digest and digest. Hader gave a light cough and waved his hand. How will Wetland develop the next step? I'll talk about it tomorrow. Heine also nodded, and said, yes, development will take time. After all, it is not a top priority. Half a month ago, Cadile sent someone to report the letter, saying that the English merchant ship had already reported it. The London side will send 8 large ships and nearly 1,000 immigrants around April, saying that it is in New England business. Those who invest in the growing Massachusetts Bay Company will, under the leadership of the general manager, land on Salem Bay in the north of Plymouth and build a colonial city with the largest investment of capital and manpower in colonial history. Heine spoke faster and faster, and at the same time showed an excited smile. Hader thought for a while, looked at Olaf and said, we have discussed before. Obviously, Massachusetts Bay Company is going to replace Plymouth as the center and owner of New England. After investigation, we found that Massachusetts has not been in recent years less involved in New England business affairs, and this company obtained a colonial license issued by King Charles I of the United Kingdom before last year. This time the company's general manager moved here with all employees and recruits. The plot must be very big. Therefore, I have ordered Cadile to attach great importance to it, not only to ensure that the fact that he controls New England is not leaked, but also to keep abreast of the movements of the Massachusetts Gulf Company in time. Olaf pursed his lips, and said solemnly, I have already inquired clearly before I came back. The Massachusetts Bay Company is backed by the British royal family, and the general manager is also a county law official and manor, with great wealth and status. The first batch of immigrants this year is about 1,000 people. Next year will increase immigration according to the situation. www.wuxiaspit.com. So I think we must decide how to deal with the new British immigrants before the general manager of Massachusetts arrives in the New World. The policy is to coexist peacefully and let it grow, or to take advantage of their unstable footing and destroy it. As he said, Olaf narrowed his eyes, looked at everyone, and finally snorted. My opinion is that Wetland already has enough troops and weapons to speed up the pace of attacking the western mainland, and at the same time, it must be more tough. We can't let the existence of uncontrolled neighbors with development potential and deep background around us. Olaf's decisive words rang out in the hall. Hader laughed, and said, okay. It won't be my Hader's son. Let's deploy troops in advance and give the new neighbor a headache. Heine's eyes flashed and flashed. And finally he sighed and said, "Since Olaf said that the Massachusetts Gulf Company has the support of Charles I and the nobles, we can't deal with them too directly, otherwise we won't be able to. Ireland and Great Britain are doing business, and there is also the risk of intercepting their fleet. After all, the English Navy is not weak, and there are many merchant ships with looting certificates. There is no need for us to put ourselves in danger." "Heine is right," Hader nodded. Katrin sneered and said, "What's the matter? We Icelanders are experts in robbery at sea. Can we still be afraid of English maritime merchants? https:// parenthesis first set a small goal, such as 1 second to remember. Shukiju mobile version reading URL. Chapter 174, The Conspiracy of the Fox. Katrin and her 2 younger brothers are not afraid of things. Although she is a female and has no knowledge or culture, she is extremely brave in many things. Katrin, as the wife of Hader, has a lofty status and influence in her own right. She supported Vinland in the war with the Massachusetts Gulf Company and suppressed New England, which made the atmosphere in Hatterberg's living room instantly heated up. After a while, the views of the Viking leaders were unified, and they were determined to give the New Englanders a headache and must not make them bigger and stronger. Hader still wanted to hear Olaf's opinion, but Olaf did not have mature ideas. He only knew that Massachusetts Gulf Company could not be allowed to develop freely in the New World, but he did not think about how to deal with them. It was soon discussed at the meeting that Vinland would organize troops as soon as possible to carry out armed intimidation and even strikes against the upcoming Massachusetts Gulf Company to ensure that it controls the new colony the same way as Plymouth. After everyone dispersed, Heine signaled Olaf. Olaf took him back to his room and sat down. "Olaf, do you also think we are going to use force to threaten to control the Massachusetts Bay Company with fairness? Do you think we can control them?" Heine sat down and frowned and looked at Olaf. Olaf thought for a while, and said, "We should be able to carry out attack control after the Massachusetts Bay Company established a colony, but it will certainly anger the big figures in London in the future. But England currently has no energy or possibility to send navy to retaliate against us." Heine shook his head and said, "There is nothing wrong with thinking this way, but we will have to go to Europe for commercial activities in the future. If Britain uses its powerful navy to want our ships in the English Sea, I think we will not be able to fight back at all. If lamb's fur, caramel, spirits and other commodities cannot be sold, they can only be sold by the French. While the profit is reduced, our money bags will fall into the hands of others. This is very unfavorable." "Yes, it is very risky if you say this." Olaf very vigilantly agreed with Heine's opinion, and then asked, "Why didn't you say this view just now? I think everyone's intention to ask for a battle is very strong, and it's not easy to pour cold water, so I want to talk to you." Heine smiled slyly. Olaf instantly understood that Heine didn't want to offend Catelyn and others who insisted on the main battle, so he smiled and said, "You want to get my job done? Let me talk to my parents again." "Yes," Heine happily admitted, and said in a deep voice, "You have to understand, Olaf, our Wendland seems to be strong, but it also has very weak and fatal shortcomings. That is, the population is too small and the strategic materials are too small. The supply is entirely dependent on the imports of Wendland specialty products from Europe. After the sale, no matter which link goes wrong, Wendland will instantly collapse into an ordinary colonial manner. You can't be confused by the surface prosperity of Wendland like everyone else. My eyes really think that we have the strength to contend with a country." Seeing Heine's warning eyes, Olaf stated clearly, "Don't worry, I haven't fainted yet. I know what you mean, so I'll persuade my father and mother not to let us Vinland and Massachusetts Bay Company directly. Conflict occurs so as not to offend the big shots of the British Isles, but we can't sit back and watch the development and growth of the Massachusetts colony in the future. This is only harmful to us, but not good." Olaf looked at Heine after speaking, and then smirked. "Did you pay attention already? Let's talk about it." Heine shook his head helplessly and said, "I remember that we discussed on the Monarch, so you also know that only the bravery of a lion cannot be strong and powerful, but also the cunning of a fox. We in Wendland now have a Viking soldier. Thousands, hundreds of white wolf soldiers, white slave militias and indigenous slave warriors can also organize more than 2,000, plus 15 armed merchant ships and countless weapons such as guns, bows and arrows, and plate armor. It is comparable to a good mercenary regiment, but our shortcomings are obvious. We have too few personnel. The core Vikings with the most combat effectiveness are few. At the same time, they can't afford it. At present, we can only fight at tailwind, just like the past. The battle against the natives is the same, As long as we encounter a well-matched or even a strong enemy, our soldiers' combat awareness will be severely reduced, and we can't afford to wear them out. If hundreds of Vikings die, their vitality will be greatly injured. Olaf knew that Heine's foreshadowing of the remarks was intended to lead to a deeper topic, so he opened his eyes and waited quietly. Heine pursed his lips and said, "We are now a powerful monster to New France, New England and even the indigenous tribes. The problem is that if we offend England too hard, they can mobilize the fleet to spend money to invite mercenaries to come. Retaliation, or joint use of guns with the indigenous people to form an army. Our situation may get worse and worse, so we are now in a dilemma. Dealing with the Massachusetts Gulf Company will face fierce retaliation from England in the future and the severance of independent trade to Europe. Failure to deal with the Massachusetts Gulf Company will allow them to catch up with us in 5 or 10 years. Olaf nodded, his eyes flickered and said, "What you expected is not bad. We are facing this situation in Welland. That's why everyone has to attack the Massachusetts Bay Company. The Vikings should bravely rise to the difficulties and cannot solve the problem. Solve the problem when it comes time." Heine hit the palm of his left hand with his right hand and slapped softly, saying, "This is true, but it is risky. What if we use the indigenous people to deal with the Massachusetts Bay Company? Taking advantage of the unstable footing of the Massachusetts Bay Company, what will happen to the hundreds or thousands of indigenous warriors attacked and killed in the past?" Heine looked at Olaf meaningfully. Olaf thought for a while, and laughed. "I am afraid that the Massachusetts Bay Company will not collapse and die, and will be greatly injured and become a vassal of Plymouth." "Haha, Heine, you have a good idea, but the natives who attack the Massachusetts colony are who? Why are they willing to attack the Massachusetts Bay Company?" Heine smiled mysteriously, then pointed to the southwest and said, "There are countless natives on the continent of North America, but the most powerful of the native tribes on the east coast that are closest to us is the Iroquois. They are rich, aggressive and expansive. Only in the past 2 years have they maintained a friendly relationship with Plymouth. Many times they rely on their fur and Plymouth to exchange iron weapons to fight with the Hurons and other tribes. We can use Kadir to buy the Iroquois to harass or even attack the colony established by the Massachusetts Bay Company, as long as they are willing to give the glassware, porcelain, iron, horses, etc., that the Iroquois wanted. I think they will never refuse." "Pretty." Olaf couldn't help but praise Heine, and then commented, "Your strategy is very good. Use the indigenous tribes closest to the British to consume the British. I think it's worth a try." Heine cocked his mouth and said, "We not only use the Iroquois to deal with the Massachusetts Gulf Company, we can also invite New France to take action against the Iroquois, so that it can better consume New England and the Iroquois. www.uxiaspit.com. Make sure that the indigenous peoples around the southern plains of Quebec are not able to harm us, and then this year you can start farming in the southern plains of Quebec as you plan." Olaf admired Heine's cereal strategy, and suddenly thought of a question after praising it, so Olaf frowned and asked, "Your strategy is very good. But Champlain will also become the biggest winners just like us. Will this quickly increase the power of New France?" Heine shook his head lightly and said, "France is a big agricultural country, and the domestic people are unwilling to immigrate to the New World. It is very rare for them to come as contract white slaves. They are not like the United Kingdom, and there is no possibility of a large number of immigrants in a short time. The shortage of manpower is also very backward for the development of the land. We colonize with them and develop all the land. They are the closest to the southern plains. Instead, they have to pay the most effort to take care of them. Getting some food resources will not harm us. Quebec, the development of the fertile land in the southern plains will arouse the greed of the surrounding tribes, and the neighboring tribes can consume most of the energy of New France there. We don't have to worry about them at all." Olaf recalled the colonial history of New France on North America. The immigrant population is indeed far behind New England. In addition, the Kingdom of France is just a land power and the navy is not enough. Therefore, New France should exist as a long-term ally of England. Go down, https:// right parenthesis first set a small goal, such as 1 second to remember, Shukiju mobile version reading URL. Chapter 175, Dog Bites Dog. The existence of New France can actually help Vinland attract the attention of many European countries, especially England, because the colonists of Vinland are not very eye-catching when it comes to arrogant European countries. Of course, this is also because Kadir controlled Plymouth. McGonagall's cooperation resulted in the British side not getting accurate information about Vinland with the presence of New France, Many things of Vinland can be done through New France. This will not only affect people's eyes, but also make New France unable to withdraw from the many disputes in North America. Number 888. Follow VX. Official account. Book Friends Base Camp, watch popular masterpieces, and draw 888 cash red envelopes. Olaf and Heine perfected some details. When they had dinner in the evening, Olaf thought about it and persuaded Katrin and Hader to agree to Heine's plan. Catelyn just didn't want her brother to encounter dangers and difficulties. She learned that Heine's plan would also make the Massachusetts Gulf Company a big loss, but she wouldn't set herself on fire to let the British know that the truth was that the Winland people were making trouble. Naturally will not object. Hader also knew that his wife was mainly concerned about Kadir, and worried that if the colony of Massachusetts, the nearest to Plymouth, helped Plymouth expel the Vinland in the future, Kadir would be in great danger. Now Heine's strategy is obviously more advanced than that of Winland's army directly. It can suppress the Massachusetts Gulf Company without exposing himself or causing damage to Winland's army. For Winland, he only needs to sacrifice some glassware and gorgeous decorations, swords and ironware, etc. This is not a problem at all for the rich and rich. Winland. Hader and Catelyn agreed to Heine's strategy after discussing a few sentences on the spot, but Hader also raised questions. This strategy is very good, but who will be entrusted to implement it? It must be ensured that the Iroquois can deal with the British guys of the Massachusetts Gulf Company, but don't send it to be killed. It's boring. Olaf also thought about this problem. The Vinland and the Iroquois fought each other once. The savages of this tribe are not afraid of death and have good combat effectiveness, but the flaw is that they do not have advanced weapons and armors, and the combat mode is also swarming. Rushing over, there is no tactics at all when encountering a colonist with a large number of muskets in hand or a small-scale regular army. 1 or 2 warriors from the tribe rushing over is also an act of giving away heads. We can give some advanced weapons first. The muskets and swords we bought from the Netherlands have French or Dutch. The Iroquois not only improved their combat effectiveness with these weapons, but also made the British suspect that they were Frenchmen. Behind the scenes, Olaf thought of a way to make the water more muddy, and said excitedly. Hader thought for a while and waved his hand. We can't support the Iroquois too much, and we can't have muskets or plate armor. We better create a weaponry that the Iroquois is captured by the French. If it is obvious that someone gave it, the British and French are not stupid. After they investigate, they will still guess that we did it. Olaf nodded and said, "That's what I said. Then give some swords and leather armors, and some bows and crossbows. So even if you do it with us in the future, there will be no harm." Hader clapped his hands with satisfaction. "Very good. You will go to Heine with me tomorrow. We will do this thoroughly if we are to do it. My mind is not as flexible as yours. You will give me more details tomorrow, after a meal." Vinland's strategy to deal with the Massachusetts Bay Company, which is about to arrive in New England, has changed from a hard face during the day to conspiracy to ward off wolves and fight leopards. When Hader and Olaf met Heine in the chamber the next morning, he laughed and said, "I knew Olaf would be able to convince you." Hader did not speak, sitting on the sofa, and asked, "Tell me your detailed plan again." "I am going to go to Plymouth in person. We are going to ask the tribal warriors of the Iroquois Alliance to deal with the Massachusetts Bay Company as Plymouth through McGonagall, because Plymouth and the Iroquois Alliance are friends, but we, Winland, our Iroquois enemy." After a whole night of thinking, Heine made some adjustments to the plan and made it simpler and more detailed. After listening to his explanation, both Hader and Olaf were 100% confident that this plan would definitely work. It turns out that Plymouth had a good relationship with a large Iroquois tribe in the past few years. In addition, after several transactions, it became a peripheral member of the Iroquois Alliance. It has been protected by the Iroquois Alliance and can also be in the Iroquois trade within the scope of the Quebec Alliance. However, the Iroquois and the Huron neighbors in the northwest are mortal enemies, and the New France led by Champlain is an ally of the Hurons. New France and the Hurons have united against the Iroquois in the south. They have already won several times before. The big victory is one of the reasons why the Iroquois fell to New England. Heine, as an internal affairs official in the city of Inlandrut, has the teachings of his family. He has already learned about the troubles and entanglements of the North American continent through various information investigations and summaries, and he has already keenly captured the Hurons and New France contradictions with New England and the Iroquois, prepared to use this struggle to keep Vinland in aloof position. Now wanting to deal with the Massachusetts Bay Company, which is about to lead thousands of people to New England, Heine thought of using the barbaric and brave local natives. They are not afraid of war and death. At the same time, there are huge numbers and, more importantly, the language barrier. It is also difficult to reveal secrets. New England is on the east coast, and the west and north sides are full of Iroquois territory. If you want to use the power of the savages and also like an emergency, you can only let the Iroquois do it if Kadir controlled Plymouth through the garrison and McGonagall. Vinland would not be able to use the Iroquois at all, but it is different now as long as Cadwal and McGonagall agree. Then in the name of Plymouth, the Iroquois can be invited to take action in the northern Massachusetts Bay and attack the colony established by the Massachusetts Bay Company. It is also completely reasonable to give some weapons and equipment with French words in advance, because the Iroquois struggled with the new French for many years, and it was completely normal to seize some French equipment after waiting for Heine to come up with a complete plan. Hayter smiled and praised his wisdom. And at the same time the three agreed on weapons and equipment that could be given to the Iroquois in advance. After a while, it was roughly set to be the French standard: 50 spears, 50 sets of leather armor, 20 crossbow arrows, and 30 longbows. This equipment is enough for the Iroquois to equip a strong pioneer team, unless Massachusetts the Gulf Company brought us soldiers, otherwise it would be able to defeat the defense forces of the Massachusetts colony. Hayter also promised that in order to let the Iroquois do things with their heart, you reading www.uucan'tchoo.com can tell the Iroquois that they can double up and give them a piece of equipment and other items after the event is completed. Heine nodded and said, with these equipment, the Iroquois will definitely agree to be a thug. Hayter sneered, I heard Olaf say that the captain who took over from Francis to New France last year was very unconvinced that we got to the west of Labrador, and once sent a messenger to ask us to launch the Basque City. Olaf's and the plan is to continue to expand inland during the hottest period of this summer. Olaf also wants to take the opportunity to give the French a little bit of color. In order to prevent New France from making small moves, it happens to give the Iroquois some more weapons and equipment so that they can better. It is a good idea to contain the energy of Champlain and others, lest they are jealous of us. Olaf felt that he had gained some knowledge and learned some political and diplomatic methods. Although Hayter and Heine were also self-exploring, it is absolutely necessary to get along with New France and New England. Thinking of the British who is the best at being a stick in later generations, Olaf couldn't help but laughed in his heart. This will let our young Wetland Vikings not speak martial arts, bully you old gangsters. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.